everyone. It's Congresswoman Lateefah Simon, representing California's 12th District. And I am so sorry that I cannot be with you all today. This is an extremely important conversation. This summit is where really the future is. The autonomous vehicle conversation is one that I'm extremely interested in. As a transit-dependent person, my work at Bay Area Rapid Transit and my work in Congress is centered on ensuring that transportation equity be at the center of all of our conversations. I cannot wait to hear what comes out of this incredibly important conversation, and I'm excited to work with you all as we advance equity and mobility in the future of transportation. Hi, Professor Riggs.
Thank you, Lateefah. Let's give her a hand. She really wanted to be here today. We talked about this in January, and what a way to kick off 10 years of the autonomous vehicles in the city symposium. Thank you all for being here, and I see some of you who have actually been here 10 years, and I really appreciate it. So let's give Lateefah a hand. Let's give you all a hand. Thank you so much for being here at the Autonomous Vehicles in the City Symposium. Could not be so grateful and could not be so excited. And you know, a lot of people have asked me this week, why do we do this at University of San Francisco? It's really about building bridges and breaking down walls. Yes, we do research, we do teaching, we do training, we do events, and it's grounded in these Jesuit Catholic values for this crazy institution that's been here for over 100 years in San Francisco. But as you will see today, we're creating a voice that includes UC Berkeley. Hopefully many of you joined our event yesterday. Let's give a hand to UC Berkeley Path, who hosted a great event yesterday. Thank you, UC Berkeley, our great partners. You will hear from Jiaxi Ma later from the UCLA Center of Excellence for Mobility. Thank you, UCLA, for partnering also on this event. Let's hear it for UCLA Center of Excellence. And so I think what you're seeing with the state of California is excellence in mobility. And we are a part of convening mobility in our state, of convening a center of excellence. And that was our vision and part of my vision in creating this center. And I think what I knew, and the proof is in the pudding, what I knew is that I couldn't do it alone. And so, this event is not about me, it's about you. And it was also a story about a company who really helped make it happen. And some of you know the story of our work with Cruise early on, and it got a lot of attention. I think to this day, some of our work with Cruise really got a lot of global attention because we are still one of the few campuses and research organizations that have done level 4 research on rideshare behavior and autonomous rideshare behavior, and showing that, people do pivot from traditional rideshare to automated rideshare. And of course, we're going to hear from Uber later on how they're looking at that trend. And there's also really fascinating trends in how this is making our streets safer. And that's super fascinating from a Vision Zero standpoint. And it's something we talked about last year, and we've typically talked about that. We talked about a lot in 2018. We talked about the future of streets, and I really reflected about that last. If you saw my post on LinkedIn yesterday, 2018, where's Jerry Tierney? Is he here somewhere? And Jerry Tierney's probably going to show up sometime today, and he was a part of this event since 2017, and we talked about the future of streets from 2017, 18, 19. We talked about this idea of building better streets, and if you remember, Tool Design was here 3 years ago with, Scott, you were there in the audience. I see you. We were talking about Vision Zero and better designed streets at that point. And it's not just about that. You're going to hear from Megan Neese later. We're talking about emotional design and nighttime safety, and a lot of that is still coming from our research. You're going to hear later also us talk about transit. And fortunately, we have a great partner in Waymo. We've been able to look at some of the stuff on transit design and transit synergies with Waymo. We did some evaluation of the Waymo Transit Credit Partnership a couple years ago. And engaging our students in this is really important. And you're seeing that from Berkeley, you're seeing that from UCLA, and you're seeing that from University of San Francisco. Our California universities are leading on this. And I think that's really important. And the Autonomous Vehicles in the City initiative is a home for a lot of that. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but the point here is creating a global vision from here in the Bay Area. And, I think you're going to hear from Dr. Cornet a little bit about that. We're very fortunate that we've not only been able to keep that here nested in the Bay Area, and with having Henriette Cornet here, we've been able to take, and hopefully you've run into Caden Rooney here, we've been able to take that and do messaging. And at ATS last year, we created a maker studio. And those of you that participated last year, we carried that to a national conference, and some of you participated in that, and we did funny little videos with Caillou and Caden here, and you can see us down in the bottom scroll there, making videos that could educate people about automated vehicles. And that's just not happening here. It's happening in Oslo, it's happening in Hamburg, and you'll see here, we're gonna hear from, we have a great sponsor in Moya who's looking at these new vehicles, looking at the ID Buzz. So it's not just a Bay Area phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. And the good part is it's still about students, it's about national partners, it's about international partners, it's about having people from Japan coming here, and then us going and engaging in Mobility Innovation Week Japan. Us going and engaging with people like Martin Searhouse, and us going and engaging at Intertraffic in the Netherlands. It's about, us hosting Princess Astrid last fall on campus, and us really getting her to ride in a Waymo, to show up at University of San Francisco in a Waymo. And thank you, Emily Warren, for giving a talk there. We really appreciate it. And it was a really big deal. At the same time, we've been able to take students and re-engage in the Netherlands. We've been able to take students and re-engage in Belgium. And just last month we were able to take some students over and re-engage. And the odd part about this is we actually took students and actually went and worked with the Dutch Minister of Transport. And the funny part is Peter van de Vedder was over there with the Coast to Coast initiative, and he's actually critiquing our students about their work in the Netherlands, and yet he's actually sometimes based here in the US, which is the kind of the irony there. But here we are, we're actually transforming mobility around the world from here in the Bay. We're transforming and getting acknowledged for that mobility in City of Amsterdam, and even getting acknowledged. This was actually last week. City of Amsterdam posts about our student work from here in the Bay. So what does the Autonomous Vehicles in the City initiative do? Provides a living lab, an example of a living lab that transforms automation and mobility from here to the world. And I think that's where, what is the example here of what we're doing? We're breaking down walls. We're transforming mobility to the globe. And I think that's a good lesson that really kind of transitions us to our really kind of transformative keynote speaker. But before I introduce him, I do want to acknowledge some of the sponsors this year that made this happen. Waymo, Nissan were really kind of have been formative in making today happen, but also Moya and Path. Path really put on yesterday and was part of our 2-day program this year. And then also Mineta Transportation Institute has been a research partner throughout the 10 years. So thank you all for your support. Let's give them all a hand. We can't do this without that support. And now, without further ado, we were very pleased this year to have an esteemed speaker. This year we have the 4th Secretary of State, appointed by Gavin Newsom in 2022. And to put it in context, this individual is from the middle part of America, some people in the U.S., I'm from this part of America, what might call a flyover state, the heart of America, from Tennessee. Born in Knoxville, but has a PhD in engineering from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Jackson State, Mississippi Valley State, engineering technology. He's chair of the Council on Active Transportation from AASHTO. He's advised the U.S. Federal Reserve. He's advised the Biden administration transition team. He's Person of the Year from the California Transportation Foundation in 2021. You know, to be director of the California Department of Transportation, to give you the magnitude of California Department of Transportation, Caltrans, that's 22,000 employees, 500 lane miles, 20,000 bridges, 250 public airports, 3 Amtrak's busiest inner-cities, 400 local regional transit agencies. Can we give that a hand? I mean, like, that's insane, but, so now, from a CalSTA standpoint, 8 agencies, 4,200 people, and $30 billion annually. Tox Omashakan, the 4th Secretary of State, we could not be more proud to welcome you. Thank you for being here. We are really grateful to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. A very good afternoon. Excellent. Whoever Dr. Riggs's boss is, we need to work on getting him a promotion as soon as possible. With that kind of an intro, very powerful. Thank you, Dr. Riggs. Really appreciate the introduction and all the work that you've been doing in driving this initiative for the last decade plus. We know it's making an impact. We can see it right in our communities, on our streets every day, and making the transportation system of this state more efficient and safer as well. So thank you, Dr. Riggs. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Also, just want to briefly recognize a few other people who are important to the discussion that we're having today. Scott Mora and Justin Wiley, I'm sure they're in the room here. From UC Berkeley Drive AI Consortium. Thank you for all the work that you're doing as well around this initiative, around the work that we're all here today to support. Also, a lot of the advancements that we've made in this space at the state level, I have to give a lot of credit. I heard Dr. Riggs mentioning some of the things that we're doing and some of the leadership from the agency that I lead, but very importantly, Governor Gavin Newsom has been a supporter. If you're not familiar with some of his sayings and some of his commitment with policy and dollars, he likes to say all the time, California is America's coming attraction. If you're going to see it, it's probably you're going to see it here first, and then it happens elsewhere in the country. And no better evidence than what's happening in this space, in this industry. So thank you to Governor Gavin Newsom for all of his leadership here. Also want to just briefly recognize some of our leadership staff that's here. Was mentioned already by Billy. Emily Warren, Deputy Secretary for Innovative Mobility. Emily, where are you? She's somewhere in the room. Okay, there she goes. Yeah, Emily, thanks for being here. Tammy McGowan, our Chief of Staff. And also, I believe you're going to hear from, at some point this afternoon as well, Miguel Acosta, who's one of our directors of the AV program, Autonomous Vehicle Program at the DMV. All these folks are the people who are truly leading the autonomous vehicle growth in our state. So thank you to all of you. So during my nearly 7 years of working in transportation for the state of California, it's been remarkable to see the progress that's been made in the autonomous vehicle industry. California, as always, had a front row seat to the industry's growth. I think that goes without saying. Companies have moved from R&D within our state to broader testing and now into commercial scale operation, with AVs now serving, at this, more than 1.2 million rides in California each month. 1.2 million. And if you look at the graphic behind me, if you could go one more time to the next graphic, to the next image, you will see just how exponential this growth has been. Just in May of 2024, we were having less than 200,000 rides in this space a month, 200,000. And now, just 2 years later, we're at 1.2 commercially scale operated rides a month. So that's how exponential the growth has been in this space. Our agency, the agency that I lead, oversees the California DMV, one of the two agencies alongside the California Public Utilities Commission that regulates AVs within our state. It's been a remarkable evolution from enabling both driverless and driver testing and commercial deployment to the authorization of additional vehicle types and modes, including transit and freight. Our most recent rulemaking will be finalized in just a matter of weeks. It proposes new protocols for traffic enforcement, first responder interaction, data reporting, and remote operations, incorporating lessons from our past experience across the state. So, some may ask, why does the state put all this effort into autonomous vehicles? It's an important question. We don't put resources into any new technology simply because of its novelty. We do it when we see potential for technology improvements to solve problems and have better outcomes for people. And before we invest resources on any program or initiative, we must know why and how it serves the public's interest. CalSTA, the organization, the transportation agency I lead, again, has done its work framed through our core four priorities. Core four priorities: safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity, as you can see on the screen. Advancing road safety happens to be our very top priority. So, again, our agency is intently focused on bringing the number of roadway injuries and fatalities down to zero by the year 2050. I think a lot of cities across the state have a similar goal, and states across the country have a similar goal as well, with nearly, as many folks know, nearly 40,000 people are lost in traffic crashes across the country every year, nearly 40,000. By the way, that number for California is roughly 4,000. We lose about 11 people a day using the transportation system of our state. 11 people each and every day. So a big responsibility for us to drive those fatality numbers down. Last summer, in the summer of 2025, I was fortunate to sign a new policy with the state's Secretary of Health, my counterpart in health. The policy is the first ever Secretary's policy on roadway safety. The policy commits California to a prevention first, safe system approach to eliminate fatal and serious injuries across the state. It also sets an interim goal to cut deadly and serious crashes by 30% by the year 2035. So in less than 10 years, our hope is to reduce the fatality numbers by 30%. By reducing crashes caused by human error, AVs hold a powerful potential for saving lives. Viewing all projects and investments through an equity lens is implicit in all of our work. Access to transportation means access to jobs, family, and quality of life. It is important to us that AVs are part of the solution to inequity rather than a part of the problem. DMV's new proposed regulations take a step to encourage use of AVs in affordable shared public transit by authorizing medium-duty AVs between 10,000 and 4,000 pounds to carry passengers in partnership with public agencies. The DMV received robust input from community stakeholders that AVs can support transit service innovations that will make transit more accessible and convenient. So equity, again, is a key part of the evolution that's taken place here. Next, CalSTA is also laser focused on supporting the state's goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and accelerating zero emission vehicle deployment. As you can see from the graphic, nearly half of all of the GHG in California comes from our sector. It comes from the transportation sector. Even though you see the number 38% roughly in this image, when you account for fuel production in California, this number goes up to nearly 48%. So almost 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions in California comes from our transportation sector. AVs and the evolution, the advancements that are happening here can make a difference and help reduce emissions across the state. SB 500, signed by Governor Newsom in 2021, requires all AVs to be EVs starting in the year 2030. That means AVs, again, become part of the solution to the zero emission vehicle transition. They offer potential to reduce cost and increase access to personal transportation, improving access to jobs and commerce. AVs also promote the efficiency of goods movement, reducing costs for consumers and businesses. And as you can see from the image here, a recent visit that I had to one of the companies that are going to be a big part, potentially, of the goods movement part of AVs across the state and across the country. And of course, here in California, AV success also means success for dozens of world-leading technology companies based in our state. All of these benefits are possible with AVs, but it will take strong partnership and governance and an active commitment to shape the trajectory of this technology into the future. So for all of you here to have this important discussion today about how we can continue to grow this sector and partner together, we at the State Transportation Agency and our partner agencies like DMV, Caltrans, CHP, we're thankful for everything that you're doing. Here in the research space, at institutions, nonprofits, it's going to take all of us together, working in partnership to continue to be the leaders that the world expects us to be. This innovation, again, like the governor likes to say, it happens here first, and there are people out there counting on us. So again, thank you for your attendance today and all the work that's going to happen from this evolving partnership that is continuing to grow. So thank you very much. I would love to take some questions. Yes. Yeah. Do I have time for a couple of questions?
I think we have time.
Are you booting me?
We have time for a couple of questions.
Okay.
If you have questions and you want to put them on a comment card, we'd like that. I don't know if we have a handheld we can do around too, but I think we'd appreciate on the comment cards. We maybe have 2 or 3 minutes where we could take a question.
I would love to. Anybody?
I think we have a card here we can take. So, and if we have a couple others, we can take on the cards. The cards are a little easier for us. So what are the policy trends? What are the AV policy trends to capture the lower economic segments in terms of underserved and underbanked transportation riders?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Particularly unbanked.
Yeah. So I think there are some models that we are looking at in the transit space that could be replicated into the AV fleet space in due time. I think it's something that we should take a look at. There's a program that we lead, if you may not be familiar with it, just write this down, Cal ITP. You're familiar with it, okay. Cal ITP program essentially is trying to make as seamless as possible public transportation system within the state. Right now, for those of you who may not be familiar, there are more than 300 transit agencies in California, probably more than 40 just in the Bay Area alone. And very often, they have completely different systems that they run, and you can't use one system to the other. as far as the payment systems and so forth. And so this Cal ITP program, if you go to China, not China, anywhere in Asia or Europe, I don't want to call out a specific country, if you go there, all you have to do is just tap. You just tap your transit card or your cell phone or card. You don't have to sit at a booth buying tickets. And so the more we can make this transition, we can also, part of what we're looking at is the people who are unbanked. Don't have a bank who can get a card with preloaded funds at a discounted rate, who can use these systems across the board in a more seamless way. Same thing can possibly apply, and we can use a similar transition when it comes to being able to use it with AVs, because very often AVs can be a part of the last mile solution when we continue to connect it with transit. So I'm not sure that we're there yet. I don't know, Emily, if we're at that point yet where we have these, cards working with the, system providers out there to be able to connect it with transit. But a very good point and a goal that I think we should keep in mind.
That's great. That's great talks. And I know there's a lot of work on the seamless initiative and with frictionless payments. And I think that gets into kind of like the whole microcredit industry, and there's a lot of people working on innovations in that sector. But
absolutely.
I think there's another question we got on the last slide, and I know I have a lot of inside baseball information on this.
Oh, really?
So that last slide showed some of the innovation that's happening with this Glideways project, and so maybe we could give that last slide another thing. So can you talk about maybe what this slide is showing? And somebody called it PRT, which is wonky, but we're going to call it small, lightweight AVs. But this is a rendering, but I think there's a project in San Jose that's doing this. Can you talk a little bit about what this is showing?
I'll be honest, I'm not the expert on the Glideways project, but anybody from Glideways here?
No, I don't think. I think there is.
Oh, really?
Benson is back in the back.
I have met with some of the leadership from Glideways, and I'm actually pretty hopeful about the potential for this. I think Emily, you and I and Tammy recently had a discussion and a meeting with them. We have to, in my opinion, we have to start exploring more and more solutions like this and how it can be incorporated into the broader public transportation system.
It's great.
System of the state. And I think this has a lot of potential for San Jose. The details of exactly how this is funded, how this is going to work out. By the way, this is an autonomous transit system, is what this is. In the Bay Area, but the details of this, I'm not the expert to.
It's a good point. And I don't know either, but I think Glideways is here, and you can find them. I think there's a guy raising his hand in the back. We aren't going to go there, but I think also it's World Public Transit Day. We should our big hand clap for that. It's World Public Transit Day, and I think what I'm hearing say, I'm going to put words in your mouth. What I'm hearing you say is, there's synergies with public transit is what I think. We are hearing from this stage is that, but it's not just about single occupancy rides here. It's about seamless integration of automation with public transportation.
Absolutely, no doubt. Yeah, that's if we're going to be able to achieve those goals that I mentioned on the core four: safety outcomes, better climate, economic prosperity in the state, addressing issues related to equity. If we're going to be able to achieve those goals, it's going to continue to take technology to help us, and no doubt thinking about the transportation system in a seamless way across the board. All these systems connected together.
So I am really sorry, but I'm getting the flashing light of death. So we're going to answer this one
Just
offline.
ignore them.
Okay, I'm going to say, how are we working with other countries, particularly China, and is this being discussed in California?
What's that?
Are we working on with China at all in terms of the China Forum? How is that? How are we working with China on EV/AV?
To a certain extent, yeah. There's engagement there. Not a ton on the AV front, but working with China on transportation, a ton.
Yeah. Everything
from high-speed rail related issues to a lot of engagement on ports. Mm-hmm. I think those two areas are probably the biggest areas of partnership where we've actually formalized agreements with them. Not specifically agreements on the AV front, but I know our folks are always talking, California and China.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Riggs, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so before I get chastised again, I am going to introduce our next speaker who's going to provide some remarks on mobility. Our next speaker, I had the pleasure of meeting first at a house party in his, when he was running for office the first time to replace Bevan Dufty for the 8th District. Senator Scott Wiener represents San Mateo on the California State Senate, San Mateo and San Francisco. He was elected to Senate in 2016. He's authored over 100 laws, focused really on housing and transportation. He's been a huge advocate in these areas. He's co-chair of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus. He really has, he's chaired the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. He served for 15 years as a deputy city attorney in San Francisco City Attorney's Office. Huge advocate for the LGBTQ community here in San Francisco. Degree from Duke University and Harvard Law School. Senator Wiener, if you are here, can I welcome you to stage? I don't see you. There you are.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here today, talk about the future of transportation with people who use it, and also for people who are building the future. San Francisco, someone asked me yesterday, what is your favorite thing about San Francisco? And there are so many, and one of them is that this is a city that is eternally creative and innovative and makes things, whether it is art or science or tech innovation. We are so often on the lead. And sometimes that creates tensions and can create some temporary challenges, but in the end, we get to a better place. And I think this is absolutely true with AVs. We know, of course, that AVs are here in San Francisco all over the place, and they are part of our transportation system. A lot of people rely on them. A lot of people love them. There are also people who love them less. And our role as policymakers is to make sure not to, in my view, try to suppress or kill off technology that rarely works, if ever. And it's not, I think, the right thing to do. It's about making sure that the technology rolls out in an effective and responsible way that benefits the public. And that is true with AVs. We want to make sure that they are safe, that they are improving our transportation system, and that they are, it's all benefiting the public. It's that simple. We can do that. We can protect safety. We can protect our transportation system. We can make sure that our transportation system is running well, while also allowing this technology to flourish. And we've taken steps in this direction. In 2024, the legislature passed AB 1777, which put for the first time some legislative requirements on AVs, including two-way voice communication, for example, so that emergency responders can immediately be in touch with someone if there's a problem, or if the car has stalled, or if there is a collision. And DMV will be adopting and finalizing regulations to implement that law in July. And this is an important first step. And we need to build on this progress. And we need to make sure that we are having good regulation to protect public safety, to benefit the public, without strangling the technology, and without putting requirements on AVs that are not possible to meet. And that is something that we see sometimes in the legislature, proposals with all the best intentions, to address real issues, like, for example, what happened last December when PG&E had a complete unraveling mega meltdown and screwed over the city during the holidays, and Waymos stalled around the city. The root cause of that was, of course, PG&E, but there's a reaction to that now in the legislature, and we need to make sure that we're not subjecting AVs to standards that they simply cannot meet. That is not productive. We want to make sure that we're putting rules in place that are beneficial and that are implementable. We also need to make sure that we have broad public benefit from this wave of new transportation technology. For example, AVs have real potential to expand mobility for seniors, for people with disabilities, and people who are not well served by public transportation. I want everyone to be well served by public transportation, but we are not there, and particularly given the often unsustainable land use patterns that have developed in California, we need to have various options for people, and AVs are one of them. And we want to make sure that broad benefit from AVs is not just marketing material, but that it's real, and that AVs are operating in a lot of different communities, not just the wealthiest communities, and really need to make sure that the benefit is spread broadly. It's also very essential, and this is something I sometimes have to bite my tongue from some of the online discourse because I don't want to get in Twitter fights with people too often. I have to be very selective and strategic in the Twitter fights I engage in. But when there are people who are of the view that public transportation is obsolete, AVs are going to eclipse it, that is false. And AVs can complement public transportation, particularly around last mile or, again, in areas that are not as well served with transit, but they do not replace it. I think we need to be clear that a car is a car is a car in many ways. Yes, AVs and human-driven cars have differences, but fundamentally, they're all cars. They are all taking up a lot of space. They are all putting wear and tear on our roads. They can all lead to traffic and gridlock. And let me tell you, if our transit systems fail, which they will if the voters go a certain way in November on 2 ballot measures, I don't care if it's an AV or human-driven car, you're not going to be able to get around anywhere because it'll be catastrophic gridlock. And so public transportation is such an efficient way for people to get around. In any car, including an AV, you're talking about one or a few people, whereas on a bus or a train, it can be many, 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 many more. And so we have to support transit. And so please do not fall into the trap of transit's going to be obsolete. The folks, it falls into the same school of thought of, we don't need high-speed rail because Elon promised us the scam Hyperloop, and so we'll do the Hyperloop instead. That was never a thing, and it was never going to be a replacement. And all it does when people make those kinds of arguments is it undermines our ability to have the best possible public transportation system. But even with the best public transportation system possible, people are still going to get around in cars, and there should be a variety of technologies, and AVs are one of them. So let's all lock arms and support all modes of getting around. Let's make it safe to bike and to walk. Let's have pure 100% electrification of our transportation system, fueled 100% by clean energy, no more fossil fuels in our electric system. And let's give people many, many options, and let's embrace technology and do it in a safe and responsible and forward-looking way. I think we are in an era, and I'm glad we're having the conversation. I started working on AI policy a few years ago, and there was definitely a certain set of people who were engaged in that conversation in the industry and some outside for sure. It is so much broader today, and I'm glad that people are really thinking hard about AI in general, and what the benefits will be for humanity and what the risks are, from catastrophic risks to discrimination risks to deepfakes to workforce risks, so that we can get ahead of those risks while also embracing the benefits for humanity. And the same is true of AVs. I think it falls into that. How do we make sure that we make it work for us? So thank you so much, and here's to a great transportation future. Thank you.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking some
Really
time.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was inspiring, and thank you so much, Scott, for taking some of your busy schedule. Really appreciate it. And we are going to keep rolling because we have a really busy schedule in front of us. We have an amazing slate scheduled. And so thanks for the questions for talks. I think he really appreciated the engagement, and hopefully you appreciated the little inspiring nudge from Scott. We have an amazing lineup, so I'm going to invite Rachel Swan out here, who has a great panel scheduled for you next. You have comment cards available for you. You can have comments and questions. We invite you to write those down. We have so much scheduled today. We're going to be very strict on time. Our moderators may not have time to get to all those questions. What Dr. Cornet and I are promising to do is, if we can't get to your question, we will actually provide an answer in writing after the symposium to our list. And if it's an anonymous question, fantastic. We will still provide an answer in writing. So if you have a burning question, let us know. It provides us a way to engage with this audience afterwards, to keep the conversation going, but also for us to meet our educational mission. And, we may actually even ask Justin Wiley and Scott Moore to help us with those answers, because we are a team, right, Scott? Yeah, so please engage with us. Let's be a community. I'm going to invite Rachel and this next panel out here. We're going to talk regulation, policy. Let's hear it for Rachel Swan from the San Francisco Chronicle.
Thank you. So one thing that interested me about both of the previous speakers was, a major theme they touched on is this tension between the speed at which technology advances and, the responsibility of regulators, to make sure it's safe, to make sure it's transparent and accountable to the public, while also trying not to suppress it. And a lot of us, in the, maybe people in the industry or consumers like me, have this notion that that technology is always advancing faster than law or regulation. We in this room have the privilege to be with a bunch of people with regulators, really. All of you, either in your past lives or your current lives, have, worked in government, and you are the people deciding for the policy. So I'm really curious to hear from you. Do you think that government is too slow? Do you think the technology is moving faster? What are your thoughts on that?
You want me to go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Do I think we're moving too
DMV.
slow? No, I think California has really been a leader in creating rules and really creating a pathway for this technology to be safely tested and deployed out on public roads. We've had rules in place now for over a decade. And throughout that time, we've created 3 different levels of permitting, which has provided manufacturers, again, that pathway to kind of explore the technology, to explore the benefits of this technology. Of course, there's a lot of safety benefits as well. But the first level of permit that we have is the companies start out with testing with a safety driver. And here at DMV, we have very rigorous requirements associated with who can be a safety driver and the vehicle registration requirements. So there's a safety driver testing. The next level of permit is where they can remove the safety driver. We call that driverless testing. And then finally, the companies can progress to what we call deployment here in California. And the distinction being where a manufacturer can receive compensation for providing rides to the public or delivery services. So we have had those rules in place now, again, for over a decade, and we're actually in the midst right now of a rulemaking that is going to continue to grow with the industry and offer those benefits for the technology. For example, we're going to be contemplating bringing in heavy-duty trucks, so that would be Class 8 semis. And then also, we're going to continue to grow with the industry, and because we've learned so much from the operations on public roads, data reporting requirements are going to change, first responder interaction plans are going to change. So again, to answer the question, I think we're very much poised here in California to continue to grow and to continue to support the industry.
Okay, I'll speak from a federal perspective. I mean, I think these things take time, right? It takes time to make rules and regs, and a bad reg is worse than no reg, and a fast reg is a bad reg. So you want, there is this push-pull where people don't want regs until they do. So, early on in the AV industry, I think what we saw is when there was research and deployment going on, the industry was a little less pro-reg than they are now. Now they're like, please regulate us. It reminds me of Lisa Simpson when she's like, grade me, please. But everyone knows that the regs don't move that quickly, right? So I think there's an opportunity here to, one, recognize that regs do take time, and to help regulators by being ahead of that cycle, right? And being very regulatory forward in your thinking and in your policy making, and telling the regulators early on what kinds of regs you think you want, what kinds of regs you think you need first, and then also helping them use other powers that they may have, which I think we are seeing at the federal level from National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. You are seeing them use other regulatory tools. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. So I work for the city of San Jose, and we're 1 million people. We're a pretty big city, but we only have about this much bandwidth to kind of deal with these issues, right? And at the same time, we are the playground for things to happen. San Francisco, that much more, but we cities in general are the places where vehicles actually hit the ground, actually hit people, actually hit cats, right? And and a lot of times we are low on bandwidth and very, very wary of the hype curves that come along with new technologies, right? We're constantly battling salespeople trying to inject their thoughts into our minds through many avenues, right? And so to some degree, regulation's taking a little bit of time. It's actually a good thing because you're letting things settle. At the same time, at least San Jose has a very kind of open atmosphere about new technologies. We try to let things go and then step in when we need to try to balance out that bandwidth lack. So I will say, no, a lot of times we don't get to regulation very quickly because we're constantly wary about just the BS meter kind of really being high on a lot of things. And I grew up in the Bay Area, quite used to the radar being pinged on that. So we need to keep thinking about that. The other thing I'll say about this is a lot of times when these new technologies come in, especially when there's such big market players like a new transportation mode, right? I mean, transportation is one of the most lucrative markets in the world. When you have a new player in this, the level of power and the level of knowledge that can be developed within the company or within the marketplace versus what we're able to do on the public side is usually very imbalanced, right? We on the public side are constantly struggling to just even get the knowledge we need to do something about it in the right way. And a lot of times the only folks who have good knowledge are the private sector. And so there's this whole kind of trust game that has to be played out, right? And the early TNC battles And honestly, the early AV battles as well left a lot of bad taste in the levels of government where I work in our mouths, because we were basically put on our heels, and legislation just kind of rolled right over us. So there's a lot more to be said in that space, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, that's a good entry for Uber. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for coming. I lead California policy here at Uber. And number one, I want to say we're very complimentary of DMV, CPUC, and the regulatory process here in California. California is the most advanced. We are deploying AVs throughout the country, throughout the world. And we find that California is very sophisticated. It's the tip of the spear on this. We appreciate the two-agency regulatory framework. We have DMV on one side, we have another check with CPUC, and the third check is going to be with cities, which I think is going to be the next evolution of this. I think, going off of, City of San Jose, ironically enough, I started in Mayor Edley's office in San Francisco around the time, 2010, 2011, when Uber, the big disruptor, was coming out. And so I was on the other side and absolutely knew what that felt like. I think Uber has really matured and evolved now. We have thousands of drivers in California that are soon going to be represented by SEIU, and also bringing on AVs. So there is going to be, of course, like some natural tension there. I think it forces us to be very thoughtful in the way that we roll out autonomous vehicles. We think about worker transition. We think about how we collaborate with cities. And, just in the back, we were talking about, I think DMV and CPUC does everything critical. Like DMV looks at the safety of the vehicle, which is, ground floor. We need to make sure that vehicle is safe. I think the next evolution of this is safety in cities, and cities are going to start to see what the patterns are, how humans interact with autonomous vehicles, and that is to be discovered. And so working closely with cities is something we are really focused on, and understanding what public sentiment is, what are the types of complaints you're getting from your constituents, how can we make those adjustments to that, because that is something outside of DMV can necessarily regulate, but it's something cities are going to be the first ones to take the feedback. So we continue to be partners.
Welcome it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one issue, amid all the rulemaking proceeding that's going on right now, and some of the bills that are moving through the California legislature, one of the big issues is, even when we have these AVs driving through city streets without anyone at the wheel, how much human supervision is still required. So, for example, December blackouts, everyone remembers the image of the, perhaps hundreds, I don't know how many, perhaps more than 1,000 vehicles that were paralyzed in intersections throughout San Francisco. And there was definitely the perception, right, from people who observed this, that they weren't moved out of the way fast enough, and then after, more recently, I remember there was this viral, unfortunate for Waymo, but there was this clip that went viral of one of the chief safety officers, or the chief safety officer, testifying to Congress and acknowledging that they have offshore assistants, helping out. So now we have this bill in the legislature that's requiring that assistants be local, that they can be dispatched within 10 minutes, that they arrive on a scene in a certain amount of time, and AVs are saying that's really going to stifle growth of our industry. So I would be interested in hearing from the panel, how much remote assistance do we need? Should we have people on the ground in the city in which these AVs are operating? Like, what's appropriate? What's the balance that's not going to kill the industry?
Yeah, go ahead first.
I'm going to frame it up and then
go
jump in. But I think it's a great question, and I think that remote operations are very important for supporting autonomous vehicles, especially level 4 systems. Again, show of hands, familiar, SAE, level 3, 4, okay. Level 4 is a driving designation where the automated driving system does all of the driving tasks that any expectation of the human driver. And so when the ADS or the AV gets into a situation that maybe it can't quite comprehend, or maybe it's getting close to the edge of its operational design domain, it reaches out to remote assistants, remote operators, okay? So there's two types of remote operators. There's a remote assistant who actually has not in charge at all of the driving task. They're just providing guidance to the autonomous system. The autonomous system remains in control. The second type of remote operator is remote driver. Those individuals have the ability to actually take control and drive the vehicle from a remote location. Now, I will say that in our rulemaking that we're working on right now, we have contemplated very robust functional training requirements for all of these types of remote operators, because we think it's very important that they're licensed in an appropriate way. For example, if you're a remote driver, you need to be able to hold the type of driver license that is commensurate with that particular vehicle. There's training requirements and certification requirements that we've built into regulation. So it's very important. We've built this robust framework to support this. The other thing that I'll mention is that here in California, we are a national and international leader in regulating in this space. But I will say that there hasn't really been any agreement in terms of national or international standards associated with remote operations. So this is something that we're continuing to work with all of our colleagues internationally on. And this is a challenge as regulators, we're going to continue to face. But I will say that our rulemaking is really growing again with the industry, supporting the industry, and also focusing on public safety, because we have created, again, a very robust framework to support remote operations, which are critical in supporting the Level 4 system.
Yeah, I think from Uber's perspective, this is one example of why Uber is making a big business bet on the hybrid model. So it's a little bit different in, for example, a Waymo, in that we will have options on our platform. If you choose an autonomous vehicle, you get one. If you choose a woman driver, if you identify as a woman rider, you get one. If you want a wheelchair accessible car, you get one. And so because we are hybrid, we have the benefit of incrementally rolling out. We very intentionally do not want to overwhelm, for example, the city of San Jose and upfront 1,000 autonomous vehicles on your street. We're going to do this incrementally and slowly dial it up, driven by rider demand, because we believe that it's all going to be choice. And as it comes out, as more people choose to have, let's say, their neighbor or human driver drive them, fine, we have human drivers. But if demand goes up for autonomous vehicles, we will continue to build that supply up. But again, this is such a big fundamental change that we see it. I think it's important that we're thoughtful in how we roll it out and really let society drive this.
Yeah, I'll keep building here. Great responses. And Miguel, I love your framing there. It puts it such a well-grounded perspective. Look, from a city's perspective, what we need is the vehicles to keep moving, not block intersections, not block driveways, to be able to respond to whatever safety events there are. And I think that from our perspective, I don't know if there's a great answer that we can give that's going to be firm from now to the future. Because I think there's so much moving around in this space that to try to say something in legislation that says you must have, no more than 3 vehicles per one remote operator, and that remote operator can't be more than 10 miles away. It just seems kind of like we're pigeonholing ourselves in a way that just doesn't seem very useful. And honestly, it's just going to cost a lot of money, which ends up costing whoever's using it, right? That might be the right response right now. Right? That might be exactly what you need right now, but who knows if that's the case in a few years from now. I'll tell a very short story about implementation in San Jose, sidewalk delivery robots. Our initial pilot and foray into that space was with a company that had remote operators who were in the country of Columbia. They were university students from the country of Columbia in I don't know, some warehouse or maybe just in their dorms, I don't know. And they were controlling the robots on our street during this pilot. And we did have one robot run over by a light rail vehicle. I don't know the exact circumstances behind that. But in general, it was fine. We didn't ever really have it was only an intellectual curiosity to us that they were so far away. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the company also had some local folks who could deal with some of the physical realities that had come up. And I think you need to differentiate these things, right? To say remote operation isn't allowed, or to me, that's about latency. Can the person actually control the vehicle and get to the vehicle in time or not? Where are they? Does it matter that much? I don't know. I don't know. And maybe I'm naive about certain elements there, but you also need folks when you have physical objects that interact in a potentially highly unsafe environment. You need folks who can also respond very quickly. So in our regulations around sidewalk delivery robots and the scooters, we have a thing where the companies have to respond within a given time to a certain kind of event, right? And I think differentiating these kinds of things is important.
Yeah, and I would say, I think there are a couple reasons that remote ops are gaining so much attention right now. And I think first is that folks were surprised, right? You have senators using words like shocked by this, right? So they were shocked not only that there was so much assistance, but that assistance was in the Philippines. And that they didn't know what the credentials were, right? And it's now been revealed that some of those folks, as you might expect from people in the Philippines, do not have United States driver's licenses. And that it was just very shocking, right? There was not a lot said about remote ops before they came to the center of attention. And I think the second part is that folks were confused because they said, oh, I thought autonomous vehicles drive themselves. And if there are humans helping, is that like the Wizard of Oz saying, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain? Does that mean this isn't really autonomy? And we also have become accustomed, and this is a kind of path to penance that we've created in the way that we talk about autonomous vehicles, I think we need to, or automated vehicles that we need to shift, which is we have been talking like humans are very dangerous. Mm-hmm. Humans are dangerous. We're going to replace dangerous humans with less flawed robots. And so now we have these humans in the loop, and it's concerning to us because we thought humans were dangerous. But it turns out that we've had all of these recent experiences, whether it's in the PG&E instance, or it's in an instance where you're interrupting an emergency situation. And by the way, Waymo is just the leader here, so they're taking all the heat, but this is a learning for everyone, right, in the AV industry. And there are circumstances in which human help will be really needed, and in fact necessary, and we have regs that require a remote operator now to be able to assist or help move a vehicle that might be stalled. And so we have this moment to recalibrate our understanding of how humans function in a system of safety for autonomous vehicles, and we have this opportunity to work together to come up with the standards, and people are, right, to come up with the industry standards in remote operations, to come up with sensible regulations and rules around it. But I gotta say, it also is a lesson in getting ahead of these types of issues, because I think many in the industry thought that this would not be regulated. Especially folks who were doing something they thought was not driving. They're like, we're not driving, why do you care what credentials someone has, right? And so I think there was a surprise on the industry side too, at the level of regulatory interest and the pace at which they caught up and proposed bills. Yeah.
Rachel, if I could just jump in real quick on the safety piece. Uber spends so much time thinking about personal safety with their drivers, with their riders. And this made me really think, DMV does everything they can to keep that vehicle safe, and that's important. But what about personal safety? And a lot of people feel like, yes, AVs are safer because there is no driver in there. But you still have a human passenger. And anytime there's a human involved, there's going to be some level of opportunity for abuse, frankly, and that's horrible to say. But speaking to a couple of community groups here in San Francisco, they asked me very directly, what happens if a woman is fleeing a violent situation and her abuser comes out and stops in front of the vehicle, right? And it's like, how do you do that? And of course, the vehicle is going to stop because that's what it is, designed to do, because it's safe. But in those situations when there is human-to-human harm, like this is a whole nother evolution of how we think about how we interact with AVs. And this is going to happen in the streets of San Jose, in the streets of San Francisco, and those are the patterns that we haven't seen yet. And this is something Uber spends a lot of time thinking about, is personal safety. And so we have a lot of deep knowledge around this, and being able to interweave this into the way we think about AVs, I think it's going to be really important. And the next evolution of this conversation on safety.
And in that case, the remote operator may be a lifeline for that passenger.
Yeah.
This is interesting. Indulge me for a second. So one issue that I've written about that I'm really interested in, unaccompanied minors. This has also been pretty controversial in the rulemaking proceeding. I will tell you as a parent, I have heard unprompted, there's a lot of debate amongst, regulators, stakeholders, people in the industry about whether, it's appropriate to have a child alone in an autonomous vehicle, in a commercial autonomous vehicle. I have heard parents say to me, just unprompted, not knowing I cover transportation, just unequivocally, I can't wait for Waymo to get to the suburbs. I need someone to drop my kid off at school. I am dying here. Multiple parents, So there is consumer demand for this use case, I write these articles, I interview people at Waymo, I say you have cameras in your cars, why can't you regulate this? They're so I mean, what is going to happen here? First of all, is there a point where the consumer demand becomes so intense that it puts pressure on regulators to allow Waymo Teen or Uber Teen, whatever teen program? Where might the CPUC land on this? I'm just really interested in, and what are explain to us the reasoning why this is a bad idea. A lot of parents really want it. They want to put their kindergartners in Waymo. I don't know, but yeah.
Well, I'd like to say, I'm looking for my CPUC friends. I'm where are my
Why are you stopping us?
Where are my CPUC colleagues?
I think Ashley's here.
Yeah, I know. We have to invite her on the panel next time. I know that they're working on this particular issue, and this is right in their particular wheelhouse. But I think, some of the challenges that I think you would face with this, and this is just the nature of an autonomous vehicle, and we have to kind of work through this, is what happens in a situation where the autonomous vehicle reaches a situation where it can no longer proceed, right? And you have, let's say, a passenger in there, and I think, Danielle, you're working diligently on this. But I think that's kind of one of those things is, I'm a parent as well, and it's kind of, if I had, let's say, somebody in the car, and the vehicle couldn't proceed, how do I get to that person? What is the company doing to protect the actual passenger? Those kinds of things. All that's squarely in the CPUCs, and they're working diligently on that particular rulemaking. I think at the Department of Motor Vehicles, I don't think I've gave an official introduction. I'm Miguel Acosta, Chief of Autonomous Vehicles at California DMV. We focus on, the safe operation from the vehicle technology perspective. And so these issues are really more germane toward the California Public Utilities Commission. But it is a very interesting topic because we are seeing this occur. In fact, some of the local governments I'm engaging with right now down south are seeing this issue actually occurring. So this is a very pressing issue.
I mean, at Uber, if you are 18 or under, you cannot get an Uber. It's just illegal. It's against our rules. Many of our drivers will stop parents from putting their they call a Uber for their child, and they'll tell you can't get in. But, so we are really thinking about this. And again, we at Uber are concerned about the safety piece of it. And I think a lot of it is we have yet to see what the patterns are. We don't know what the habits will look like. We haven't seen a major incident, which of course will come and what's going to happen in the streets of the city. And so we want to see what that looks like. In terms of, unaccompanied minors, in a vehicle, it is something we encourage all stakeholders to contribute in. The CPUC has a scoping memo out, which dictates the types of rules they're going to make around the topics they want to make around AVs. One of the most urgent ones is unaccompanied minors in AVs. Do we allow it? Yes or no? What are the parameters? And Uber's position is, and we told this to all of our stakeholders, is that if you are working with children, you're a family organization, you should submit your comments and feedback because the CPUC is an open public process and you should commit what your comments are on that matter. And we want to hear everyone's voices because I think that's the best way we get good regulation.
I'll just say a couple things. I think it's such an interesting topic. I mean, one, what's the philosophy of parenting that allows children to take care of themselves and not in the world, right? When you live in a big city, letting your kids go take transit by themselves is a big moment, right? In a lot of families' lives, the kids are finally, mature enough to be able to do such a thing, and the world, when you trust them, that all these kinds of things come out. So I have just personal trouble saying we're not going to allow anybody under 18 not to use this thing. It seems honestly like a bad move, right? And then the suburb comment is so important, because you do have public transit that's worthwhile in denser areas of our state. But when you don't have that, you lock people into their geography by not allowing them the options to get around otherwise. And so it's a hard thing. And I think that, I don't know, this is just purely Ramses's own personal parenting philosophy. You need to let the person that is your child grow at the rate that they're at, and you as a parent and that child need to make a choice as to when you think that's right? And that's all I got to say about it.
Yeah, I also have to say I immediately thought of the show Old Enough. Have you guys seen this, where they send little kids to do errands? We let kids ride the bus by themselves. We let them ride BART by themselves, right? Why do we do that? There are a lot of folks who would feel way more comfortable putting their child in a driverless vehicle than a vehicle with a human driver. And that is a piece of the safety matrix too, right? The risk of not only assaults on passengers, but what people don't talk about a lot is the risk of assaults on drivers. And so there are safety benefits like that are to be considered, as well as the convenience benefits, where caregivers are some of the most burdened people in the whole transportation system, right? And so if you're going to say, no, we're not going to allow you to use this super convenient thing, continue to be burdened by your own, effort to cart whoever you're caregiving around for. Like, why is that the trade-off? Why is that the decision that we're making? And I think we actually have a lot of resources for making these decisions, because there are all of these other areas where we handle unaccompanied minors, including to fly. We have all kinds of other areas that have to do with the push and pull of parental versus children's rights, like in healthcare. And of course, there are a lot of concerns if a kid gets into a car without their parents' permission, and all kinds of other things, which is why a lot of companies have it against their policy to let unaccompanied minors in them. But I think from a broader social perspective, I'm kind of with you on this. We've got to let's do some more thinking.
That's right, yeah.
Now, pulling back a little bit, when we talk about safety, and the big question now is who's the simplistic question, like who's safer, AV driver, human driver? I was going to say robot driver. AV driver, human driver. We have people on this panel who are working at the federal level, at the state level, at the city level, at the local level. What metrics are you using to decide safety? Are you just looking at collisions? Are you looking at stops?
I'll start this one off if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So there's the general metrics that we're all using, right? Which is kind of crashes per mile driven, right? That's the most cited kind of stat out there. But I think from a city perspective, I really want to challenge us to think about how these systems work within the larger safety system in the roadway at the local level, right? Vision Zero was brought up by Tokes in his opening remarks here. And I really think for us, that's what we care about more than anything else as these are coming in. We're trusting DMV and the federal DOT and CPUC to kind of certify the vehicle safety and the system safety. But for us at the city level, what we care about is that the bicyclists feel more comfortable driving on the roadway, that pedestrians know how to interact with the systems and they feel more comfortable being able to walk around the city, that vehicles are less a threat to everyone else in the system than they are today, right? These Vision Zero movements are a really big deal for us in cities, right? Because this is really what we feel is our big responsibility. Every single time someone dies in San Jose on the roadway, most of us in DOT get an email, and then we get the information as to what actually happened, right? And so we take this responsibility really, really seriously. And the more that we can work with companies that are taking a more city level approach, we really appreciate that. That's what we want to see. We want to see how are we helping bicyclists be able to come out in the system that much more, right? Can you help us get information about those systems so that we know where there's places where bicyclists are continuously getting closer to vehicles than we think they should, near misinformation, right? So there's a lot of that kind of systems thought and metrics that I'd really like to square the conversation around, because at the level that I'm at.
I think that's great. I think from the state perspective, we're taking a look at expanding the type of metrics that we're looking at. Currently, right now, we collect collision data, and that's collision data when autonomous vehicles are testing on our public roads. And we post all of that data on our website. So anybody here in the public can go onto our website right now, see all of the crash reports, and get access to that particular data. But what we've seen is in the crash data that we've seen, a little over 40% of these crashes are really minor rear-end crashes where human drivers are actually the ones actually crashing into the back and hitting the autonomous vehicle. We're seeing these are relatively minor, low-speed type of collisions. And so we're taking a look at crashes for sure, but this is really a kind of a lagging indicator of safety for us. And so one of the things that we're taking a look at in this new rulemaking, I keep referencing our new rulemaking, and maybe many of you have already kind of commented on that public process, but we have some leading indicators we're going to be taking a look at. For example, we're going to be taking a look at braking profiles, hard braking. There's studies that have shown that in telematics studies that hard braking can actually be a precursor potentially for a crash. And so we're going to be taking a look at hard braking profiles. We're also going to be taking a look at this issue of immobilizations, where the autonomous vehicle actually has to stop in the middle of the road. And we're going to be wanting to understand those types of situations. The other leading indicator we're looking at is when the autonomous system has some kind of software or hardware failure. Maybe there's not a crash. Maybe there's no injuries associated with it, but there's some kind of failure associated with that autonomous driving system that we're going to want to understand. So I think at the top of our discussion today, we talked about growing with the industry and what we've kind of learned moving forward in our rulemaking. We're wanting to have metrics that provide us as regulators the ability to start taking a look at potential issues and working with the manufacturers to understand how they're remediating those. I'll say one more thing, and I mentioned one of our panelists said we certify. I want to be clear, the state, we don't certify these companies. So we here in the United States, different from our European friends, we have a self-certification model. So manufacturers of vehicles and technologies self-certify here in the United States. And what that means is that we as regulators need a strong post-permitting controls. And so we've built here in California off of that federal model of creating these post-permitting controls. And really we need those leading indicators to help feed some of those.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the federal government, we use a lot of the lagging indicator data because that's what's available to us and that's what's reported. So things like the number of crashes per vehicle miles traveled, or the fatal crashes, or when someone has to be evacuated from a crash. And it's a really unsophisticated way to think about safety, and it's really unsatisfying. And when we are looking at, you gotta give props to Waymo for all the data that they're putting out there and all the white papers that are helping folks. And I know I see a lot of research friends in the audience who are real safety experts, so you should ask them their opinions. But I think it's a really unsatisfying measure to talk about accidents per vehicle miles traveled for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. One of them being that we're not making an apples to apples comparison. And my mode in DOT was trucking. And there's a lot of reasons that trucking is often safer, no matter, when there are accidents, they're huge, right? But you have highly qualified drivers driving on routes that they pick. And routes that avoid a lot of the types of potential crash risks that we as human drivers driving our own passenger vehicles as not highly qualified drivers, no matter how long we've driven. So it's just not an apples to apples comparison. And I think it's a mistake for the industry because at some point that number is going to move, the more that you deploy. And so, picking a measure because it's convenient to pick, it makes your case now, but you're really like setting the wrong milestone. And I would say the other challenge that we have is like, some folks will say, well, just make it better than a human. If it's just better than a human, then we're satisfied. Well, the problem is we don't know how humans drive. And we don't, unless we're going to go and put sensors on all of our vehicles and AI and cameras to understand how we're better and where we're better, which I just think is a fool's errand, that's not going to work. So I think, echoing your point, Miguel, I think we just need to develop some better measures and recognize we're gonna learn over time, right? We're gonna continue to learn, and that's one of the benefits that this data in the space is gonna give us.
Can I take 30 more seconds on this one?
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to say something first now. One of the things that this moment in technology and safety it can bring about, and is starting to happen a little bit, Waymo just started releasing some interesting information about street conditions, is we now have, whether it be AVs or honestly just general vehicles, we have very intense sensor suites scanning every detail of our cities constantly. And we as cities who have to maintain the pavement, who have to make sure that the systems are right, have to make sure the street signs are still there and weren't taken because it's someone's last name, right? It's you have these there's just innumerable, like San Jose, what do we have, 5, depending on how you count it, roughly 5,000 miles of roadway we have to take care of, right? There's no way for us to actually keep a knowledge set up as people would expect it for us to know about this. But these sensor suites are running around and they're capturing every single detail. And so the more we can standardize how that knowledge can be transmitted without giving away important business details that need to be kept by the companies, as well as personally identified information from folks out in the systems. And I'm the chair of the board of a foundation called the Open Mobility Foundation, where we work on problems like this. The more we can get those data standards out there and the more that we can get those sensor suites to actually give information into those who are making decisions about how the infrastructure is managed, both planned and operationally managed, the more these systems can start becoming a really great, tight, positive loop together.
I did have one more question I wanted to ask, but first all right, I'll just ask my question. So all of our keynote speakers today at least touched on the issue of equity and accessibility. And that interests me because, I am culpable here as a member of the media. We create a lot of buzz about, when our AV is going to go to wine country or Tahoe. We're obsessed with Tahoe and wine country, But I am wondering, how are we going to ensure that there is an AV market in Oakland, in Berkeley, in Antioch, in all of these places where they may be needed? Is there anything that can be done? Is it going to be up to the market? I really am interested in Danielle's thoughts on that.
Yeah. It's interesting. And again, we don't have AVs on the market yet. We will next year. But I don't want to put Waymo on blast here, but Waymo is permitted for Oakland. Oakland is a dense city. It does have the population similar to San Francisco that would be receptible to an autonomous vehicle. Why not Oakland? Why Santa Monica? Right? That always is just the obvious question. But in terms of Uber's position on this is we are looking for equitable distribution. We also are very sensitive and recognize that autonomous vehicles are the physical manifestation of AI. And nobody really remembers the first time they typed into ChatGPT or Claude or anything like that. But everyone's going to remember the first time they get into an autonomous vehicle. And that is going to garner some real and visceral emotion from people, right? Because that is some immediate and in-your-face job replacement, whether that is the types of feelings you have. And drivers power Uber. They are the lifeblood to our app. And so we are very thoughtful in how that is and how it makes drivers feel. What is a just transition look like, and how far is that runway? And so it's something that we are being very thoughtful about, and also really thinking about the communities we deploy in, because it is going to garner some serious emotion that is then going to go directly into City Hall. So we're thinking about things like that.
Yeah.
Can I boost San Jose?
A couple.
So I think part of this is where we're giving attention, right? Mm-hmm. Where we're all giving attention is where the market gives attention, right? And so I think we have an opportunity to point to places like San Jose and say, this is a remarkable place that you should be looking to deploy. And there's so many other communities like that. And I think to the private sector, I think on the public sector side, we need to go out to, Billy talked about flyover country. I'm from South Carolina. We need to go out to these communities and advance teams and not wait till industry is coming there and start to educate the communities and start to have people put their hands up and say, we want you here and here's the case for it, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I'll say our experience with new emerging technologies in San Jose is that they focus on the most lucrative markets for good business reasons, right? And that makes a lot of sense from a business perspective, but from an equity perspective, it is not, right? And to push to spread that out more has required us to pass local legislation that says if you want to have scooters or sidewalk delivery robots in our city, you have to serve other neighborhoods as well, right? And I really applaud your perspective. And again, as I said before we got out here, it's a very new perspective for me from Uber. But I have not seen, and I don't think anybody who's working in these companies is evil or bad. Everyone's companies need to make money. That is their reason d'etre, right? That is what they're supposed to do. We, on the public side, are supposed to be market correctors a little bit, right? We have to be careful about how much we do that and all that kind of stuff. It's a very delicate balance. But our economy, in California in particular, helps those who have it already and doesn't help those who doesn't. That is, anyone who thinks differently, let's go have a beer. But it's pretty serious, right? And these kinds of technologies, being able to get around, to go see your family, to get to jobs, to get to the gym, to do whatever you need to do to survive, these are fundamental elements of being a person and being successful. And right now we are seeing, right, more and more technologies serve folks with more money, and their lives can accelerate and gain all the benefits of that. And those who have less can't access these things as well. And we as the public sector, and hopefully well-acting private actors as well, but we in the public sector, that's our job. Our job is to help steer these things in a way that helps more people than these systems otherwise would. So I do think it requires legislation of some sort. I think it needs to be very thoughtful. It needs to be worked out carefully as to how to express it. But to me, it's a really important point to say this doesn't just happen because one company in the market might think it's a good idea. And honestly, sometimes that puts them down because the other companies can make more profits because they decide not to and all this kind of stuff. So anyways, it's a lot more said that.
Bravo for that. But I do want to say, I don't think we should talk about equity and economics like they are competing with each other, because you can be equitable and you can be profitable, and you should look for how you do that.
I agree. Agreed.
Right.
Yeah, agreed.
And we have received the 1 minute sign like 5 minutes ago. So thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much to our audience. This is I know I've interviewed a bunch of you, so this is a real privilege to be here. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Let's give Rachel a hand. This is a great bunch. Thank you so much. Really want to stoke up the energy and here's here to the triple bottom line. Let's actually give a handshake to that, because we don't have to sacrifice equity for economics. And I think I talked a lot about USF's grounding in social justice, and I think we should not forget that. Sustainability and social justice are not mutually exclusive. And I think that actually also undergirds I think the expertise of the moderator of our next round. And so let's keep the energy up and give Marta Gonzalez a big handshake or a big hand of applause as she comes to the stage. UC Berkeley professor Marta Gonzalez, welcome. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate you gracing us with your presence. Thank you so much. Marta Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the facilitator for our next panel. And our next panel is called Experts and Industry. And it's going to be different. It's not going to be we sitting here and talking. Each of them is going to have 8 slides to present. And the idea is having the university talking to the industry. And the type of topics we're going to talk is AI integration, safety, and some human perception, and some international insight. But before that, I was put in charge to introduce myself and what we're doing with the university hat at UC Berkeley. I am professor both in city planning and civil engineering. And we have heard many times through the day our tension. What is our tension? I'm headache with these new technologies, that we have the wealthier population using AVs, and we have strong inequalities in the city. So I need to help my engineering students to optimize revenue, optimize travel times, but my planning students are worried about who are we leaving behind. The usual way to do the planning was with travel surveys. What we do in my team, Human Mobility and Network Labs, is the new generation of surveys. We, all of us, gave up our privacy to be in constant with the information all the times. We can convert these pings of the mobile phone data in flows of people moving all the way. Then, how we crunch the numbers to see what would be, if AVs would be a public good, what would be the social optimum? But it is not. Then we need to have the revenue of the companies. So this tension between social good and business optimal is that what we do with these mobile phone data demand models. I also come with my PATH director hat. I am acting director for our real director, Scott Mura, and PATH is a 40-year-old center, younger than me, right? Basically, we want to make mobility efficient, equitable, and safe. And I have one thing I would like you to remember from PATH, that we are not only doing research, we are at the deployment set. We are bringing the technologies, anything we crunch in my numbers in my lab, how it goes to the industry. And we have a strong ties with Caltrans and the city. So we are really at the university between the technology and the deployment in the industry and the state. And here we have several projects. I'm going to mention a few. We go from converting our campus in a test bed for autonomous cars towards doing autonomous cargos and logistics in rural areas. You can read there our featured projects, and we will be happy to tell you more. And with that, let me introduce our first expert that comes from the university. Is Professor Yashi Ma from UCLA. He is the director of the Center of Excellence on New Mobility.
Great, thank you, Marta, for the introduction, and also thank you for Billy and Henriette for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about. They asked me to talk about AI, AV, and mobility. Right? This is a kind of complex world, such a whole world of mobility problems. So I decided to pick one specific thing called physical AI for autonomous driving, and the term I usually call open world mobility. I will tell you what does open world mobility mean. I should have put a word, human-centric physical AI, on the title, and I'll tell you why. You will see why I forgot about that. Okay, I don't know where to point to. Good. Okay. So I'll just quickly about our mobility innovation at UCLA. So we do a lot of technology development, AI, robotics, and autonomous driving. So kind of a few different areas we do a lot, starting from building digital twins and simulation, all the way to building the core algorithms behind autonomous vehicles and robots. And we developing Westwood as our living lab now. By the way, this is an Olympic athlete village, so we have a digital twin ready for that. And we do urban resilient mobility analytics. This is where we model entire transportation systems, looking at more high-level goals like congestion, equity, and sustainability. Last but not least, a lot of edge devices. We believe mobility is not just autonomous vehicles. It should also be including HAI robotics, and these are things that will be assisting different needs in the future. We also run a Mobility Center of Excellence. This is a center established by Federal Highway Administration at UCLA with our partners listed here. The center is much broader in scope. It's much more interdisciplinary. It basically looking at, our charge is looking at how these new technologies, new mobility technologies, absolutely automated vehicles, but other mobility technologies will have an impact on land use, urban design, engineering systems, real estate, accessibility, and municipal budgets. We've been working with our stakeholders, and if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me and our staff members, and we will be love to work with stakeholders on any of these mobility problems. Now, come back to the open world mobility, what exactly it is. Again, when we define mobility these days, it's not just the vehicles, right? It should be, for sure, including infrastructure, for sure including any other participants of the mobility systems. In this case, we actually thinking robots. What I have here is a quadruped robots in our lab. So I show here because this thing is going to play a very critical role in the future, being last mile delivery, or there will be assistive technologies that are helping people with disabilities. So this is going to be a very critical part of mobility, vehicles for sure, and also smart infrastructure. Infrastructure getting smarter and smarter. We have sensors, we have more decision makings and more AIs deployed at infrastructure. So they will be a very critical part, especially Department of Transportation, how they will interact with the new mobility. And again, your people with also all sorts of assistive devices. In this case, we are working with another team at UCLA, really looking at autonomous wheelchair. And we're looking at autonomous wheelchair that can actually communicate with our infrastructure when people cross intersections, which is very dangerous in many intersections, how we can make sure it's a safer for all these people. Again, back to open world mobility. Now, this is the whole term open world, in fact, makes your problem more complicated. It really means that you don't observe anything. Anything can come out, like jaywalking of any of the pedestrians. Distribution shift, meaning that there's your systems, right? Autonomous vehicles, robots need to deal with new weather conditions, new behaviors of the local drivers, and in different cities. I mean, long tail really means that you can experience anything happening on the roadways, right? For example, a weirdly shaped work zones, right? Or maybe its original was good, but after a while it becomes very difficult for these robots or autonomous vehicles to recognize. So these are difficult questions. We address these problems in two different, methodological approach. One is that we've been working with our UCLA's Risk Institute. It's a conventional risk assessment approaches that we identify all the risks, right, along these systems when for example, autonomous vehicle go pick up and deliver passengers, and what's going to happen. We identify all the risks and we develop corresponding strategies to mitigate those risks. The other side is we work on is that we deeply believe a lot of the problems, right, we see on the news, right, the vehicles, the autonomous vehicles sitting in the middle of the road or something else. It probably is because of the fundamental intelligence. We believe that the world is too complex for many of the robots, and there's on the one hand, we want to help them prepare. That's a risk assessment. On the other hand, our work is really helping them be able to understand, reason, and perform these complex actions. And so I'm gonna fly you through some examples because I only have 3 minutes left. And I'm like less than half into my own slides. But I will fly you some examples. This is actually the UCLA Smart intersection. As if you see that we have sensors installed, but this intersection by nature is just so complicated. If you look at the bike lane and all the work zones, miraculously they always have work zones on this in this intersection. And then you have pedestrians, and we have a lot of scooters. So this is a very complex urban environment. And we have emergency vehicles, absolutely, because there's police stations on the one side and the hospital on the other side. How you would expect an automated vehicle to be able to see and be able to behave fully complying with the traffic norms or traffic rules in such a complex environment. By nature, it's very challenging. Traditional AV stack, I detect something, I respond to it. But in such a complex scenario, also remember, sometimes there might be, say, no right turn on red. How automated vehicles are supposed to know, oh, there's a right turn on red, and then, okay, there's a pedestrian in front of me, and then there's so many coming together, how they're supposed to act reasonably. We had one project for Federal Highway Administration, basically develop a new capability for automated vehicles to be able to using more advanced intelligence, in this case a vision language model, to understand what's happening. And we have an external database. We're using a technology called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Technology Generation. Basically, it's a database for these vision language models, for these intelligent vehicles. We basically supplement it to the traditional autonomous driving stack so that the vehicles really can understand the traffic rules, local traffic rules, retrieve local traffic rules that applies and then comply with the traffic rules. Good example, I also show here, when AVs want to go through the intersection and their pedestrians almost finishing up their crosswalk. What this AV should do, if the AV make lane change using the other side of the lane, the lane on the left side, do you think is it compliant of the traffic rules? In fact, it is not in many places. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to let the pedestrian clear the crosswalk first and then go. But if you have a simple engineering system designed to set a safety buffer, there's no guarantee that the AVs will behave in a compliant way. So this is a video we actually equipped on our UCLA's vehicle. We actually worked on it and proved that such a system will be helpful, right, ensuring vehicles is compliant. There's another thing that we worked further. In the interest of time, let's focus on the most right side. This is really helping, using advanced AI models, helping them to decide what are the challenging scenarios I should really think more about using more advanced technology like vision language models, and what are scenarios we can use in more traditional stack that will ensure that will be straight enough for me to work on. So this is another technology we have been developed. The last thing I want to mention is also another thing that is almost like think slow and act fast. We're all humans like that too, right? Like me, I always talk faster than I can think. It's the same thing here. You need this time to think, but you really need to act for safety purposes very frequently. And this is even more important because a lot of these assistive technologies like robots are deployed on this edge devices. They're limited computing. And these are going to support human beings, for example, assist people with disabilities to navigate through the complex environment. So it's a non-trivial issue, especially for these devices. You have to solve these issues in a large way. So we have done a lot of extensive algorithm development. I'll ignore that part. But I want to mention that we really were able to ensure that the thinking exists, but also control also applies. This is the kind of robot. We assume that in the future, maybe people with this, disability will use this kind of robots to navigate them through the environment. So these robots, they have to make sure themselves is safe enough first, and to be able to identify the objects, dynamic or static, identify different environments, and then be able to really guide the people through the complex environment. And we tested in indoor environments. We tested in the campus. This is UCLA campus, by the way. It's very hilly. It's a lot of stairs. It's very unfriendly. But I think technology like this will be very much supportive for future people with mobility. Last slide here is that the human-centered aspects. We are responsible to develop all these AI agents, algorithms, but eventually there's a products here, but then the humans is really at the center. I think even in our world, when we develop physical AI algorithms, humans still at the center, right? All this data we have collected to making sure these robots are in compliance with traffic rules, are compliant with the traffic norms, driving behavior, assisting people, are really data that from humans, and then we're using that to train our robots and making sure them are going to perform in a way that will best benefit our human and benefit future mobility. Thank you much for your attention. I think here.
So my goal is to transition the speakers, and now we're continuing on the safety topic through industry. And we have here NVIDIA. And we have here Jonas Nilsson, the head of AV safety at NVIDIA. Jonas, welcome.
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Yes. Awesome. I'm hearing cheers here, so there's high expectations. That's scary. So let me see if I can meet them. All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit on how we're thinking about building safer physical AI with something we call NVIDIA Halos. And there we go. Okay, so first to set the context. So essentially we've had these different eras or stages of AI. So it started out with AI doing fairly simple things. It wasn't simple at the time, but now it feels simple. Taking an image, finding a pedestrian in the image. And we have gone through all of these stages, and now we're at this point where we call physical AI, where we're really saying, we are essentially giving super complex tasks like driving or like having a robot, running around in your home and doing your laundry, right, to AI. So what does this mean then in terms of safety assurance? So if you're a safety engineer, this is what happens. When you have a pretty simple task and humans are essentially monitoring this, then this isn't very safety critical because all these mistakes are essentially something a human can handle. But when you give it a complex task like driving a car or running around your children as a robot, then this becomes very safety critical. So the level of safety assurance we have to have on this grows over time. So this is kind of the grand challenge of using AI in this way. Going a little bit then to how does the architecture look like? So in the beginning of AI, we had small AI models doing small specific tasks. The models have grown bigger and bigger and bigger, and we use more and more data. And now we're at this point where we're using something called foundation models. And I think this is what most people are in industry and technology are pushing ahead with. And foundation models are really models where you're using massive data, so internet scale data, and you're training a model that can do many things. And it's typically what you call end-to-end. So it takes images, text inputs in, it does all of that intelligence, and then it gives you actions or reasoning and text. And this is an incredibly powerful model, so everybody wants to use it. When you look at it as a safety engineer, then you're seeing this is a single point of failure, so I need to figure out how to make sure that this doesn't do the wrong thing. So fundamentally, this is what it comes down to. How do we assure that we can use this technology that is incredibly powerful, and as the previous speaker talked about, to handle all these complex things safely, we probably need these models to do that. But how do we assure that it's actually safe in the context of a product in the real world? So to try to give a glimpse of that on some holistic level, this is kind of a slide to go through essentially how does it work when you build AI. So at the bottom here, you have the actual car or the robot. I would say in traditional safety engineering, we have a lot of processes, a lot of tools, a lot of methods to build, to essentially build that thing. Build the hardware, build the software, build the things that go into the actual product. Now, when you build AI, you actually use 3 computers. You are first training it with massive data in the data center. Then, when you're done with that, you're simulating it, you're testing it at massive scale through all of these edge cases, all of these things you have to handle. and then you send it into the robot or the car. And this goes in a tight loop, round and round and round. So essentially, from a safety engineering standpoint, the bottom here, we pretty much know how to do as an industry, but we also need to make sure that any mistakes in the top two are also caught, because if your training data is wrong, it might lead to an issue. If your simulation is not trustworthy, it might lead to an issue. So we're trying to take a holistic approach to this whole ecosystem. And this is essentially what we call NVIDIA Halos. So in NVIDIA Halos, we've taken all of these services we're building for all of these 3 computers, and it starts from the hardware at the bottom, and essentially goes up all the layers of the software we're building, the algorithms we put on top, the AI models we put on top of that, right? And we have put that together along with the principles and the methodology we're using to put them together into a safe product. And at the end of that, we've also started an inspection lab so that we can work with all our partners to make sure that anybody who uses our technology in a safety critical product, we can go and inspect and give them feedback and make sure that they're actually building and integrating a safe system. And let me walk through some examples. I won't go through them all, but essentially some examples. Starting from the bottom, if you have this very powerful model, it needs a very powerful computer. So we start with essentially safety assuring the hardware itself, and this has to be safety certified to the highest level, so it doesn't make bad mistakes. There's a lot of software on top if you're running this model in the car. This also has to be developed with rigor, and you can't have bugs and so on that are safety critical. And then you put together that in a system, in a car. You put hardware, software, and sensors together and make sure this is a fault-tolerant system. Going to the next level, and once you have this safe platform, you want to launch this end-to-end AI model in the car. So if you look here to the right, the first thing you can think about, let's just launch this thing in the car. I just take my big end-to-end AI model, is really great. The first thing you think about then is, if I only have that, it can never fail, correct? It needs to be essentially bulletproof. Now you can do that, but essentially this is a problem that is very hard to show that it's true. So the validation effort is too large. On the other hand, to the left there, you can take a more traditional system where you break things apart in pieces. You can analyze it. You can test these things in isolation. So it's a much more testable system. Now, that system isn't as powerful and intelligent, so it won't solve all your complex problems. So essentially, our approach here is to use the left one as a guardrail for the right one. So you can think of it, we put them together. We let this very smart model drive the car 99% of the time. But the more modular system constantly checks that it's doing the right thing. It checks, did you run a red light? Did you go off the road? Did you do this and that? And it checks it. And if it finds a problem, we can make sure that the system fails safely. So we can bring the vehicle to a control stop. And next, data center. So as I said, an immense piece of actually safety assuring AI is to look at what you do for training and what you do for the data center. So this is an example of how we're running simulations at scale to test our system. So this is using an AI technology called neural reconstruction. And what we essentially do here is we take vehicles driving on the road, we record the data from them, we put those camera recordings in an AI model, and that AI model can essentially create new images and reconstruct that whole environment. And that means we can essentially change everything in the simulator. So we can cover all of these edge cases, all of the cases the AV stack needs to handle. And this can all be done safely, at scale, and very fast in the data center. And this is kind of the key to make sure that whatever you put on the road is actually extensively tested. Okay, last but not least, the inspection lab. As I mentioned, we at NVIDIA, we see this as an ecosystem problem. You know, no company can build this on their own. Our technology integrates with other people's technology, and we have to make sure we have constant collaboration on this. So what we've done here is we put together this inspection lab. And that's essentially a pool of NVIDIA safety and security experts go out to our partners, we look at how the technology was integrated, we make sure it meets all of the safety requirements and all of the manuals we put with them, and give them a certificate for that to make sure that we're using this system in the right way. And we have actually had, I think, around 40 partners signing up to that. We launched this less than a year ago, so we are super, appreciative of all of the collaboration from the ecosystem of this. And we foresee this growing a lot in the future, given how much progress there is in this field. Okay, that was it for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Now, we have our next industry speaker. He's from Nissan, and he's here in Silicon Valley, Vice President of the Center for Advanced Technology. And with that, Martin, welcome to our session.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon. As said, my name is Martin Searhouse. I run the Nissan Advanced Technology Center in Silicon Valley. We've been around since 2013. I actually opened the center at that time. And we're working on every aspect of mobility and autonomous vehicles, also battery technology. We actually have a battery lab where we test new materials for batteries based on machine learning and all kinds of cool stuff. Today I'm going to talk to you about what we have been doing in Nissan in Yokohama, Japan. But before I start, I want to just tie my talk back to the previous speakers. First of all, on safety. As some of you might know, Nissan is working with Wave Technologies and Uber on providing robo-taxis. And we're working on this issue that we were just talking about, the previous speaker was just talking about. And the one thing I have to say is, like, it doesn't exist yet that there are level 4 systems end-to-end. And this is something I just wanted to make sure that we are in a phase where we're still trying this new technology out. And it's very important that we do that in a safe manner. And I think the speaker from NVIDIA showed how this could be done in simulation. The other thing about Scott Wiener's description of public transportation. I live in San Francisco. I live in an area called Noe Valley, and I had to come here today. And I had to decide how to get here. I didn't want to drive. I checked my Waymo app. It cost me $22.50, and it would take me about half an hour to get here through Waymo. It was going to drive me over 280 and 101, and then I checked my Google Maps to see public transportation, and it took me 30 minutes. The J Church is right outside my house. It cost me $2.85 to get here. And guess what I did? Although I can afford the $22.50 for a Waymo, I took the Muni. Thank you very much. And it was a wonderful experience. And I feel that is very important for us to realize. Public transportation has a purpose, as Scott Wiener was saying, and I totally agree. And we in Nissan also agree on that. And this is why we did the Easy Ride. We call it the field operation test. That's because I come from NASA, and at NASA, when we test things, before we start a mission, we call it a field operation test. And so at Nissan, we adopted that term. And we ran this test from November 27th of last year to the end of January of this year. And I just want to explain to you what we did. And we did this to learn what it means to run a mobility service, right? So this was, of course, it's about autonomous vehicle getting to level 4. That's not the real purpose of this talk. It is really about telling you what it means to set up a mobility service, and what a company like Nissan, as a car company, is facing, and to decide what to do with this new way of mobility. So the vision that we have at Nissan is to support regional mobility and create a vibrant community. And this is why I brought up the story about myself having to get here from Noe Valley to Embarcadero. And so we want to design this transportation that is aligned with local needs, and not just, push a technology as what we as automakers think that should happen. We really want to ensure quality of life. And in Japan, we have, there is, I don't know the exact numbers anymore, but there is something like 8,000 miles of bus routes that have disappeared over the last 2 years in Japan, because of the elderly communities, cities outside of the, small cities outside of the big cities losing, their population is becoming older, and public transportation cannot be, sustained anymore. The other thing which is happening in Japan is that the average age of a taxi driver in Japan is 58.6 years old. And the new generation of people do not want to be taxi drivers anymore. So they're losing a lot of people. So these are the kind of things that we look at as a car company to see what we can do to create new mobility. And then, of course, safety, as we talked about, and peace of mind is very important for people inside that community. So what we've tried to do in Yokohama is create this field operation test. So we build an L4 mobility ecosystem through collaboration with several partners, and I'll talk about that in the end a little bit. And it ran, like I said, from November to January. We only operated during the day, like from 8:30 in the morning, and only Tuesday to Friday. And then the vehicle itself, so a Serena-based vehicle. This is not a vehicle that we have here in the United States and in Europe. This is a vehicle that is only for the Japanese market. And it basically had capacity for 3 passengers, and we had a fleet of 5 vehicles. Right, so we created 5 vehicles, and then we had 26 pick-up and drop-off locations inside Yokohama in an area, and 2 vehicle depots, and we got 400 people to sign up for this service, but the service was free. Right, so that's what we ran, and here is just a little video of the app that we had. I'm sorry, it's in Japanese, so for those of you who can read Japanese, you can follow it. But it's basically kind of like any app that you think about, the Waymo app, the Uber app, you call it, you name it. Now, what is a little different is, it's like kind of nice. And I mean, one can debate whether this is a good way. It's the way to identify yourself with the vehicle, and you will see this in a moment. So here you call a vehicle. Here the vehicle is coming. This is actually Nissan headquarters in Yokohama. You see the vehicle stopping, and you see this QR code on the door of the vehicle. And so now you will see the passenger presses and then identifies him or herself with the vehicle using the QR code. And then the door automatically opens. And I should say this is a level 4 vehicle. That means that there are redundant systems, redundant braking, redundant steering, redundant sensors. But in Japan, we're not allowed to drive without a safety driver. So there is a safety driver in the car, as you can see. In the front here is a screen for the driver, right? It's not for the passengers. In a moment, you will see, kind of a screen for the passengers in the back. So yeah, you see this is a kind of an engineering display, as we all know. And then in the back, I hope it will come up in a moment. Here you see the screen that the passenger sees in the back. You see the time of arrival, and then you see, some other display for the passengers. All right, so to move on, we also developed a mobility control center, right? Because a mobility server does not, as you well know, we were actually the first ones who brought teleoperation to the automotive industry. And that was because I came from NASA, and teleoperation at NASA is, going on since the 70s, right? So we brought teleoperation to autonomous vehicles, and we demonstrated this back in 2017 at CES, but now you see it here applied in our control center. And so the control center has 3 areas. On the left side here is the teleoperation. I don't think I can use my pointer, but the teleoperation side. And then in the center is kind of the overall plan and the people that see the mobility service as a whole, the vehicle. And then on the right side, maybe I stopped the video. On the right side, you have the people that actually communicate with the passengers inside the vehicle. So this is set up in Yokohama, and so this is how we monitored the service running. And then at the end, what is really interesting, so now we're analyzing the data. But I can tell you from our experiences already that this is not a one company kind of model, right? I know that companies like Waymo are doing this all themselves, but they're not building their own vehicle, right? In this case, you could see the companies that were involved in this FOT, right? So Boldly was doing the remote monitoring. We provided the fleet management system, right? We provided, but they operated the remote monitoring system. Then we had monitoring and support personnel that was provided by a company called Premier 8. And then we had vehicle operations and management, another company. And then in the end, we had to work with the local government there, right? So you could see that this whole ecosystem of creating a service, and sure, you can have one company do that, and then, that is fine. Waymo is such a company. But we believe that in the end, when there are many, many companies providing this kind of service, it's kind of an ecosystem. And how to work together and how to do this and how you multiply this over multiple OEMs, multiple places, is really what we are interested in. And then you could see the hockey stick of usability, how many people use the systems. And we only had 5 vehicles, and it's a small trial. But we learned a lot about the cost of operations, the maintenance of these vehicles, the charging of the vehicles. These are all incredibly complex systems that you have to work on. And in the end, I think the model only works if it's cheaper than if we just have a human driver. And so this is, I think, something that we all need to work on, and trying to get that $20 to $50 to get from my home in San Francisco here to $2.85. And this is a question that I think we need to work on all together, and it's not just one company that can solve that problem. So that is my story to you. So thank you very much. That's it.
Great. So for our panel now on OEM innovation and scaling challenges, I'm very happy to have on stage Randy Iwasaki, CEO from Iwasaki Consulting, also chairman of IRF, the International Road Federation, yes. Correct? And former executive director of CCTA, so everybody will have the chance to say more about yourself. Then we have Toby McGraw, Chief Revenue Officer from BIP, and then Paul Escobar, State Policy Lead from Zoox. And if you notice, what I really like about this panel is we have kind of the entire chain from really the authority, the public. So Randy, you will be here really to represent more like the public sector. Okay. On the other side, Zoox from the industry OEM point of view. And then Toby, I think it's wonderful the work that BIP is doing, connecting the world between the public and the industry. So welcome again. And I suggest before diving into the topic of innovation and scaling challenges, I'll suggest you say a word about yourself, be concise, because we will have time to dig into the topics more later.
Sure, great, thank you. Henriette, thank you for the invitation. Billy Riggs, thank you also. It's great to see all of you, and I love being on the panel because the only time I see Toby is on a panel. So it's good to see you again. And Paul, good to meet you on the panel. So I'll probably see you at the next panel, hopefully, if I'm invited. So I spent my career, I'm really representing the public sector. I spent a long time at Caltrans, and then I went and ran the Contra Costa Transportation Authority for 11 years. And then I led the transportation vertical at Amazon Web Services for 2.5 years. And now I have my consulting business. So I'll kind of hopefully give you kind of my view of the public sector in this topic.
Awesome.
Toby, please.
And then Toby McGraw, as Henriette said, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Beep, so all things sales, marketing, as well as external affairs. I've been with Beep for about 3 years. Beep, we're really focusing on deploying shared autonomous vehicles with public transit and with cities. So everything that we're doing is a business to government or a business to business model. I've been in and around tech mobility startups for the majority of my career. It was actually quite interesting hearing the conversation about unaccompanied minors earlier. I spent 5 years at Hop Skip Drive, which is the largest TNC that's focused on unaccompanied riders, those under 18, in conjunction with schools. And so again, not a consumer focus, but very much a B2B focus. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Paul, please.
Yes, and thank you for having me on the panel and for having Zoox. It's always nice to participate in these forums. My name is Paul Escobar. I'm the state policy lead for Zoox. I have been with Zoox for a little over 5 years, but I've been in the AV industry kind of at the state level policy for a little over 10 years now, which is kind of strange to think about for such a young industry. And Zoox is an autonomous ride-hail company. The thing that really, I think, is one of our most defining characteristics is our purpose-built all-electric robotaxi. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but no traditional driving controls. It's really designed around the rider to enjoy and for the autonomous driving system to drive. But we're also kind of unique among the AV operators because we are also the producer of the vehicles, so we design and produce the vehicles. Very proud to produce them in the United States, right here in California, in fact. Our production facility is just across the bay in Hayward. We're the fleet owner-operator. So we kind of are vertically integrated across the board and have kind of a unique perspective here.
Awesome. Awesome, yeah. And we'll come back to that. We'll dig into the unique product that is the Zoox vehicle. But let's go step by step. Start with the word innovation, what we mean with that. In my previous research, when I was a PhD student in Germany, a big part of my PhD thesis was on the topic of innovation for public transport. And I started really my thesis defining the term, because I think when we hear innovation, we may think directly about tech. Technology may be the first word that we hear, but I think there is plenty of way to innovate and to be innovative, and tech is not the only way. So that's a bit where my question is going now, and I would love to hear your opinion, the three of you. So starting with you, Randy, what do you think an innovation, what qualifies as an innovation, and maybe as a public sector side, like a meaningful innovation? What can you share on that, and also throughout your career, what you've seen?
I think innovation's like the term beauty. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and depending on who you ask about the definition of innovation or whether that was innovative, you might think it's innovative, I might not, and vice versa. And so I think it's very hard to define innovation. In the public sector, the meaningful innovation, I think, is when you solve a problem that you have. And I'll give you an example. This is in the early 90s. I had just been promoted to maintenance and operations deputy in District 10, Stockton. And my boss didn't know anything. We were on the cusp of going from CAD, we're moving into CAD away from hand-drawn plans and things like that. And he asked me, we had a fog-related issue on I-5 near, we call it the Mosdale Y. So it's southbound 5 going at 205 to 580. And it's very foggy in the old days in the 90s. We had this thing called Thule fog. And it would just, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I mean, it was bad. And we'd have 70 car pileups on I-5. And so we got sued over our environmental document didn't address visibility. And so my boss called me in his office and said, we got to fix this. And so what we did is we took a ground and loop detector and we spaced it a certain distance apart. So now you measure time and distance, so you got speed. And that information was relayed to one computer. And then we put weather stations in 7 of them at 7 locations leading into the Mosdale Y with backscatter visibility meters. That information led into another computer, and that fed into the master computer that then analyzed speed versus visibility, and it would relay that information to a Model 500 changeable message sign. And after that system went live, we didn't have a fog-related accident there since. Now it's gotten a lot warmer and there's not as much Thule fog, but during that time we implemented that system, and it wasn't very innovative, but the innovation was a combination of things that you normally use to solve a problem that we have and save lives. And at the end of the day, if you work in the public sector, safety typically is paramount. It's your top priority. And so I thought that was really innovative. My boss, who didn't know a lot about technology, thought that was the best thing he'd seen since sliced bread. And today it's old technology, but it's combining existing technologies. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Toby, on your side, being at the interface, as I mentioned earlier, so what resonates most with your clients, with the cities you are talking to, the authorities you are talking to? Is it the tech at the end, the innovation itself, the product, the vehicle, the autonomous vehicle at the end, or more on the service, etc.? So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that the answer on that is actually evolving. And so we know, I think so much in our industry at the moment, when people are talking AVs, they're right away thinking AVs and robotaxis are one and the same. They're synonymous and interchangeable. And certainly the largest focus, the biggest market is absolutely robotaxi. There are some of us, though, that are laser focused on thinking about how we can use shared autonomy to really empower and drive public transit. Because when you think about the opportunity or the promise that shared AVs can bring, there's a lot of things that come to mind. First and foremost, we think about safety. You know, I think lately Waymo's done a really, really great job of kind of talking about the safety of the Waymo driver compared to some human drivers. You know, there is quite a bit of data actually out there on human driving and the amount of accidents that are caused by human error, right? And that's well documented over decades and decades of research. So certainly there's opportunities to improve that. So the promise of safety is absolutely there. We think about things like reducing emissions with, you know, all AVs being electric. That's obviously something that we see very, very clearly. We think about the opportunity, especially in shared formats, to think about how we reduce road congestion, how we think about competition at the curb. So there's a lot of promise associated with all these things. And I would say some of the very, very early people likely saw kind of what these promises were. People like Randy, frankly, when he's at CCTA, I believe the first person to implement or import an Easy Mile shuttle, or at least that's the story that Tim tells. But very much these early individuals like Randy were very focused on, hey, there's a promise here. Let's use new technology and see if we can actually implement it. What we've started to see over the last 2 to 3 years is where we've really crossed the chasm to where it's like, yeah, let's do demonstrations. Let's figure out how this could work. Let's think about how shared autonomy could actually implement and be used within a community. To now it's like, this promise is real. Let's actually create programs for a variety of form factors, you know, small, potentially microtransit opportunities all the way through larger vehicles. And how can we actually use shared autonomy to drive ridership into the broader transportation and public transit ecosystem? How can you really empower public transit? And so I think we're starting to see the shift then from people that just wanted to test technology and really see like what it was like to actually using this to change the way people move throughout their communities.
Yeah, change. I see. Thank you. Moving to you, Paul. I think, yeah, when we visualize, I hope every one of you visualize the Zoox vehicle, and I hope you have tested it. You had the opportunity to test it in San Francisco. I used it recently with a friend, and the person said, sitting in it, something like, that's what the future should be like, something like that, something very nice. And so that's why I think that's kind of the core of innovation and like radical product innovation even. So how do you decide, so to say, how far can you push the innovation on the vehicle side, but still be sure that you stay aligned with the regulators and the city, so to be sure that you don't move maybe too quick and I don't know if you could scare people, but like that it will look too high tech or something like that. So how do you deal with that?
No, I appreciate the question. And I'll say first, if you haven't, you can download our app today on the Apple iStore, the Android store. And you can get on our wait list today in San Francisco. That's open. You won't be able to ride immediately, but you can get on the wait list, and we're letting folks off. I'm so glad to hear that you were able to take a ride. And if you find yourself in Las Vegas, you can use it today. It is publicly facing for free. So to the point of, if you haven't seen it or experienced it, please do. And before I answer the specific question too, I also want to build on what the others were saying, really around kind of the development of the technology and where we are today. And I think it's interesting, if you'll indulge me for just a moment, if you look at kind of the history of autonomous mobility, the first attempts really were when we've had automobiles for the first time. Like in the United States, I think the first attempt was in the 1920s, and you had a radio connection to it was in a parade, and they had a following vehicle, no one in the front vehicle. They connected by a wire, and they were controlling by radio. Ended up crashing into a building. But it was really interesting, right? Like, this idea of autonomous mobility has kind of been here from the beginning. And what I appreciate about what you said, Toby, is the most recent real efforts started, right, the modern efforts with the DARPA challenges in 2004, 5, 7, to where we are now, where, as you heard from Secretary Omashakin, right, there are rides, there are commercial operations happening today. We're in the realization phase, right, of this long-standing dream. The technology has reached a point where we can do this safely, we can do it safer than what we see on our roadways today. And the insight that Zoox had from the very beginning was, if you're gonna, and we're getting close to 12 years as a company, very, very exciting, very proud of that. But the insight that we had from the very beginning was, if you're gonna build an autonomous vehicle, you don't need to just put sensors and compute onto an existing platform. Yes, you can certainly do that, and we do that with our testing fleet. But this really, if you're not going to design for the driver, if you don't need a human driver anymore, now you can really think about, well, what is this vehicle being used for? And for Zoox, this is passenger mobility. And we oriented the design of our vehicle around, how do we make this safer, first and foremost, for our passengers and other road users? How do we make it more enjoyable, right? What kinds of features can we include? What kinds of driving behaviors or different attributes of the vehicle or the technology or the service to make it more enjoyable? And ultimately, how can we have it fit into an urban landscape in a way that complements existing transit and reduces congestion, gets people out of their individually owned and occupied vehicles and into this kind of shared platform? And when it comes to thinking about that new design and how do you kind of build the trust with the public, with regulators, I mean, one is communication is really, really important. And the way that Zoox thinks about this is we kind of have a mantra. Folks that I talk to in particular, this will sound familiar, but no surprises. That is very, very important to us. We are engaging early and often with regulators at the federal, the state level, in particular, folks in the local context, the policymakers, political leaders, key community members. First responders are a really key population too. The vehicle looks different. And so we need to make sure that we're introducing it. Folks get a chance to experience it, that we're explaining it. People understand how to contact us, right? First responders in particular. How do I know it's safe to approach? How do I know it's not going to move? How do I get a hold of you? We go through all of that well in advance of operations, and then as we continue, because that is going to be pretty critical for our operations. And then the other piece that I'll kind of conclude on, maybe we can expand in later questions, is Zoox takes a very deliberate approach to our expansion. The way that we talk about it is tiny, small, medium, large. So we don't show up in a community and suddenly we're everywhere with hundreds of these vehicles. We really do take our time to make sure that the community is getting introduced to it, that we're meeting the bar that we set for ourselves, and we grow steadily from there.
Yeah, and we'll dig more into detail because it's almost touched the topic of scaling and how the innovations can evolve. Before talking to scaling, let's just move really from and all of you already touched upon the topic of deployment, real world deployment. I like, Toby, that you mentioned the Easy Mile and the Navia shuttles from back then, and Randy, you have so much experience with them. I had as well, because I was coordinating a project in Europe where we were deploying these shuttles, and what I like to say is they form kind of a legacy. I don't know if you would agree with that. I think they created a nice mental model on what it could be, what autonomous vehicles could be, aside from robotaxis. So I think we can be grateful. And by the way, the French startups, so kind of, and I'm French, so that was a nice thing back then to have these companies. But yeah, and it was exactly visible back in the day, this gap, basically. So we have what's technically possible on a test field, and then what is deployable in cities. So there may be sometimes a disconnect, and also because I have been involved in so many trials and pilots, I can see that now there is really this need for, okay, how can we move it to a real world deployment and go beyond the multiple pilots that have existed, and there are still some of them exist still today. And Toby, I'd like to start with you from this deployment, because that's what Beep would do, right? If you can, you offer multiple services, but one of the services is really to help cities, transit agencies deploy their services. So you bring from the more like on the trial or from the lab for the test track to the road. Where is the gap? Where is the most problems that companies are facing? So to say that you're facing, is it on the procurement can be difficult, the operation, the public acceptance? Paul mentioned it a little bit. The topic of communication was mentioned. Or is it internal from the agencies? So where do you see the problem between the ideas and the real world?
Yeah, I'll say that there's a few different things I want to highlight here. First and foremost, when we think about overall industry challenges, especially for deploying autonomous vehicles in commercial vehicle settings. The biggest challenge that we've had, as Beep is really our supply. And so much of the AV world focused on robotaxi, focused on automobiles. When we think about commercial vehicles, commercial buses, frankly, the OEMs, especially here in the US, have been not focused at all on autonomy. And so when you think about, some of the large bus companies where they have multi-year backlogs just for electric vehicle platforms, they're not really incentivized in any way to focus on autonomy. And so the companies that have been focused on autonomy are those based abroad and really thinking about how they bring the vehicles here to the US. And so we've imported a lot of vehicles on the Box 7 waiver to be able to test various form factors. We've also, started to work with conforming vehicles, which are FMVSS, but having to be either OEM manufactured and shipped to the US or done in the aftermarket sense. So at the very, very tip of the spear, just commercial vehicle autonomy has been something that's been a bit of a challenge. Going hand in hand with that, frankly, is some of the funding mechanisms behind them. And so many of our public transit agencies are focused on leveraging federal FTA dollars. And of course, coming with FTA dollars is the requirement for Buy America, which makes a ton of sense. But at the same time, it really limits these companies' ability to bring vehicles to the country because there becomes very significant capital outlays in order for them to do so. We've had some companies that have proposed various Buy America availability waivers, at the federal level. Towards the end of the Biden administration, there was a Buy America waiver for electric minibuses that got very, very close, was open for public comment, that basically died in January. And given that it's for an electric vehicle and with this administration, it's just not something that's going to be going forward. And so at the very, very top level, we've seen just some high level supply as well as funding restraints. Now, we have had customers, cities, transit agencies who've been able to get over those hurdles. And so when we think about actually deploying vehicles at scale, then some of the things that we've seen to be challenges is, sometimes there can be a little bit of a murky regulatory environment. And so we have to obviously cover that. So often the vehicle is regulated by the feds, the driver by the state. state? What are you doing with an autonomous vehicle? Across all the states we operate in, there's definitely been various levels of that regulatory policy that you have to navigate. Infrastructure itself, particularly for charging, this is something, in a state like California, because we have so many electric vehicles on the road, we take it a little bit for granted. But in other states, that network is not near as built out. And so that becomes a significant challenge. And that's one of those things that at the last minute, it's like, oh, by the way, this is a level 3 charging vehicle. Where are our level 3 chargers? Are there anything close? And so those are some of the things that we've thought about as well. And then just other kind of integration points within a city. And so whether we're thinking about integrating into the smart transportation infrastructure, V2X, signal priority, different things like that, or we think about integration into back office systems. And certainly we believe that to properly deploy a system at scale within public transit, you can't come in and say, oh, hey, that existing planning system you have, get rid of it because you need to use this. We really have to meet the customers where they need us. And so being able to customize a solution, it makes a better solution for the city, but it makes it a little bit less repeatable. And so when we try to go to the next city, it's not exactly a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, but that's exactly what BIP can help for, right?
That's exactly right.
Transferability, which is such an important topic. Randy, about you now, about what your previous work at CCTA, particularly because you are the founder of Gomentum, correct? And that's something that is known in the region as really kind of a catalysator of where innovation also can merge. And I see it, but I would like you to tell me if it's also kind of the idea you had back then of something like a transition towards more what is a lab, but being then tested on the road and to enable later to go on open road. So what was the origin of Gomentum, and how do you see that? Is it correct to see it as something that can bring it to the real world, bring innovation to the real world?
The genesis of Gomentum Station was a board member. And if you think about Contra Costa Transportation Authority's board in those days, I got hired in 2010. Within 3 months, staff said, if you keep talking about technology, you're going to get fired because the board does not like technology. And so I said, we have a fundamental problem then, because I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I'm not working to keep my job. And I think that technology will help us fill in those gaps where we can't serve our public because the existing programs don't solve it. And so our Susan Bonilla, later became, she's a supervisor, became assembly member. She said, go out, and there's a place called the Weapons Station. I want you to go out and find a way of creating smart jobs, because we have one of the societal issues we have in the Bay Area for sure is you've got a jobs housing imbalance. So you live out in East County, but you work in South County or you work in San Francisco, and you got congestion going up and down 680, going 24, over 80, over the Bay Bridge. When Bijan was there, when we worked together, that bridge had 200,000 vehicles per day, and BART carried 200,000 people per day. But if you bring some of the jobs over to East County, you start balancing the jobs and the housing. So that's really what the genesis of Gomentum Station was. We actually call it Project 51 because Jack called, I told Jack, he worked for me, go talk to the Navy because it's owned by the Navy. And then we got yelled at by the city because you don't talk to the Navy. Even though we negotiated the Bay Bridge, the footprint on Yerba Buena Island was owned by the Navy, so I had to go back and forth and talk to the Navy about getting access. So we're used to dealing with the Navy. But Project 51 became Gomentum Station, and then it really provided a front row seat to the abilities of technology, because the last thing in California you want to have something go bad is the pendulum typically swings, you can do it till you can't do it. There's no in between, hey, you made a mistake, something bad happened, but we'll forgive you for this one. It just typically shuts off. And so we created the test bed because you had a 2-mile tangent roads with intersecting roads. So you have intersections. We had a mini city out on the other side of Highway 4, and we could really take a front row seat to see the capabilities. And then we did the ODD trying to figure out 194 use cases. And Frank or Robert Ferger and Ray Cowrie here. So AMG was actually, I hired them as our strategic consultant and our innovation consultant. And so we really had a great partnership with CCTA, Caltrans, DMV, NHTSA, and AMG to kind of round this thing out. And this is 13, 14 years ago. And so then we brought in the Easy Mile shuttles. We checked the wrong box there and said we're going to operate only on private roads. And we had to go mea culpa to NHTSA. And the other problem real quickly, for the public sector is we're used to standards, we're used to specifications, we're used to manuals. And when we started this program, we were just making this stuff up as we went. and so again, I figured I was going to get fired one of these days over a misstep, so I might as well go in a blaze of glory. and go in a way that you're trying to help society. And so that's where we're really focused on those use cases.
I see, super. Paul, to you, around exactly this topic of like what we mean from innovation to real world, how we translate, and I think the topic now we are moving to the topic of scaling, actually, from ideas to real services, public services accessible to the public. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I would like you to come back on it, saying from Zook's perspective, how does scaling look like, and is it to have vehicles as many cities as possible, or more vehicles in a small, like in one city? Like, what's the best strategy? If what you can share, of course, like what's trouble? I'm very curious about this type of strategy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I would say it's. Again, going back to kind of the deliberate expansion of Zoox, that is the way we approach things generally, right? Whether it's within a city or between cities. Now we are expanding. The robotaxi has rolled out as of this month in Austin, which we're very excited about. We're going to be rolling out in other places soon as well. But our first commercial markets, of course, are going to be Las Vegas and San Francisco, and we're very excited about that coming. Now, when it comes to expansion, right, like both within the city, that deliberate expansion, and then kind of across the nation, but in both contexts, it's going to be gradually expanding the what we call the geofence, right, the geographic area that is served, that service area, as well as the fleet size. And there's a balancing. The wait list is a way for us to see, and then the service we're doing in Las Vegas, a way for us to see what demand looks like, and it's very exciting, I will say. And then another component to this is because we're the manufacturer of the vehicle, right? We have a unique set of circumstances there where. Obviously, fleet, like the number of vehicles you're putting out there over time and making sure that you have the vehicles out to get out there as you scale up your operations either within a city or between, across cities. That is something that we look at quite seriously, and we have a particular responsibility. And we're really, really proud, and I mentioned it, we're very proud of the production facility that we have opened here in California, in the United States, where we are producing these vehicles. We just announced it last June, I think it was. And it's not producing this much right now, but at full clip, when we're at full capacity, it can produce up to 10,000 robotaxis a year. Now, with all things, right, Zoox takes a gradual approach, so we'll work up to that level, but we're laying the foundation right now for what expansion looks like within the state of California as well as across the country. And that facility, it's 220,000 square feet. There's some debate internally, but I think the figure is 3.5 American football fields, creating hundreds of jobs here in the state. And these are jobs, right, that are manufacturing jobs. They're EVs at a time when the policy landscape is quite complicated. And so this is one of the ways in which Zoox has the opportunity to set its pace. And it has to be mindful, right, as we're kind of scaling, that we're hitting all the needs correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that leads me perfectly to kind of, and I'm seeing the time, and I see that we will need to wrap up slowly because you mentioned you need to be careful on the scaling, etc. What do we need to be careful about, so to say? What are the potential negative externalities that could happen if the scaling maybe happened too quick, or in a region that have not been investigated in detail before, where public acceptance may not be as high as expected? There may be many reasons why it may be an issue. And I'd like to start with you, Randy, on what you have experienced, so to say, where this negative externality could come? Like kind of what should we take care about it? To put it in a more positive way, so to say, what are the risks and what should authorities, public government public agencies be careful about?
I really like to focus on the positive things, not the
negative
things.
So let's say...
But let's say the negative things. So I think a good example is the transportation network companies, TNCs. When they got to San Francisco, you go from... they used to say in San Francisco they had a population of 800,000. During work time, they had 1.6 million. They go back down to 800,000. Remember? So then they run the TNCs, and you have 400,000 cars in San Francisco. Now you get 800,000 cars in San Francisco. So 50%, I think, of the increase of congestion in San Francisco is caused by the TNC market. So that's definite, maybe a negative impact. You have more availability, but it's also an affordability issue as well. So, I mean, if I don't have a lot of money and I can't use it, then what good is it except it's clogging up the roads and potentially creating more problems for me as a pedestrian or bicyclist. So I think that's one negative aspect. And then parking. These vehicles today, where do they park? And so one of the companies that I'm working with has an app-less-based, hardware-less-based parking solution that also provides guidance to the autonomous vehicles so that they can park somewhere rather than double park, triple park, create all kinds of problems. You're stuck behind them, and it causes a lot of grief. And when you're angry as a driver, you take more risks. And so I think there's some safety aspects as well. But I think that at the end of the day, the positives just overwhelm some of the negatives. I mean, if you can get the fatality rate to 0, I mean, you're not going to do it with the way we do it in the past, engineering, enforcement, and education. It's going to have to be a transition into some other technology.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So, Toby, what's your view on that, and how to make sure what we deploy, the real-world deployment, and the scaling is still desirable and aligned with public transit goals? How do you see that? How do you see the things we should be careful of?
Yeah, and so I think it's really important here, especially for a lot of innovative companies, tech companies in particular. There's a Silicon Valley kind of thought process that you move fast and break things, which you just absolutely cannot do in transportation. And so when you really think about, I was listening to someone talk. There's a UCLA event in Lake Arrowhead this weekend that I attended along with a few other people I've seen here. But someone was talking about, data centers having to be at, 5 nines in terms of redundancy and uptime. And I was kind of thinking to myself, I don't think that's even enough in transportation. The expectation is much, much higher than that. Because when you're thinking about deploying tens of thousands of vehicles and it ends up being millions and millions of rides and road hours, that 0.0001 becomes way too frequent. And so you really have to move very, very slow and deliberately to make sure that you're scaling up and growing and learning appropriately. Now, one of the things that occurs to Beep, especially in a shared ride environment, when we're thinking about, okay, we're putting 10 to 20 passengers in a vehicle, a traditional bus driver, sure, they're doing the steering, braking, acceleration, but they're also doing a lot beyond that. So when you think about public safety, when you think about passenger safety, things like if someone has a cardiac event or a fall in a vehicle when there's no driver there. All of our drivers, CDL drivers, are required to, have first aid training. And so they're doing that type of kind of very early kind of support. But what do you do when there's not that driver there? Same thing when we think about, kids getting transported unaccompanied. What happens if a kid has an asthma attack or something else and there's not a driver there to physically help them? So you have to think about building tools within the in-cabin experience as well. And so some of the things that we've developed at Beep, for instance, have been AI into the camera stack. And so if someone has a fall or someone has a cardiac event, or if we detect a weapon on board, we can at least alert that, have real-time remote command center look to see what's going on, and then escalate it accordingly. And so this is where we believe that this human-in-the-loop element becomes really, really important. Not as a part of the safety case. We're not necessarily believers that someone remotely should be driving or should be making safety-critical decisions, but having a remote set of eyes to be able to identify there's an issue here, we need first responders to go, or we need a vehicle to route this way, becomes really, really, really important. The last thing that I'll just say on safety, because I know we're almost at time, is really thinking about those outside of the vehicle itself. And so often we're thinking about safety of our passengers themselves, but it's other road users, it's drivers, it's pedestrians, bicyclists, scooter users. When we think about the number one place for heavy, both fatality as well as critical injury, it's not the passengers in the vehicle, it's it's the people outside of the vehicle. So how do you make that experience really safe? It's one of the things that, when we're here in San Francisco and I'm crossing the street and I see a Waymo coming, there's not that ability to lock eyes with the driver to be like, hey, do you see me? But what can we think about in a ride environment that might say, that maybe there's LED lights that say, I see you after you, or some kind of like known way to ensure that we're properly communicating between, a remote or an autonomous vehicle and that pedestrian.
Yeah, I love that. So what I like also in this type of dialogue is you can take the requirements from the public, from the authorities, and really make a bridge to the tech and to the OEMs. So Paul, what about you? And time is short, so we will have to be concise for the end. And I have one last question after for all of you, but how do you ensure that ride-hailing with AV services can really contribute to the entire urban mobility system rather than fragmented? So what should be careful on this side?
I appreciate that question, and I'll pick up a thread from Senator Wiener earlier, which so I'm up here representing an AV company, and obviously we really believe in the value that AVs can bring to the transportation system, and it's real, right? With safety, you talked about that, Randy, in terms of like the status quo is not acceptable, and AVs can be a really meaningful part of the solution in that. But he mentioned, for us, we also recognize, and kind of referring back to Senator Wiener's comments, that AVs are not a silver bullet. They're not going to solve all of our transportation problems. And the most efficient way to move the largest number of people still is, like a fixed transit. And other kinds of public transit are going to be critical. Multimodal transportation, walking, biking, right? These need to be part of the urban landscape. And we think that AVs can fit into this in a complementary way in a couple of ways. One, because they're going to operate more safely around those vulnerable road users, right? That multimodal environment. Our vehicle is also designed, as I'd mentioned, for shared mobility. We're wanting to get people out of their individually owned and occupied vehicles into a shared electric platform, helping to bridge the gap between the first mile, last mile solution, connecting to these transit options, giving alternative transit options to the riding public. And then Zoox also really does value public transit. We're supporters. Senator Wiener mentioned some of the ballot efforts that are coming up. We are supporters of the Regional Transit Initiative here, because we really do see that Zoox's service and AVs more generally will be entering into an existing transportation landscape, and they really can augment it in a number of ways.
Has to be. Love that. So for closing, super quick, and it's kind of an egoistic question, if I may say, or selfish question, because at Urban Innovate, we provide every quarter a review of what are the deployments, the actual deployments currently running on the streets, really from robotaxi, from buses. There are some buses, microtransit, so different use cases that we review every quarter. So I'm asking all of you, but super quickly, what is the deployment? And if possible, Paul, I will start with you, maybe not within your own company. Yeah. What is the deployment, the thing you are really looking forward to? Is there like an innovation out there in the AV field that, and we can start with the others.
And I would say it's actually not an innovation. It's when AVs become boring. Right? Right now they're very new and exciting, but as people start to experience it, it becomes part of the landscape. People become more familiar with it, they trust it, they're used to it, that it's not so unique in that regard.
You mean when we don't need to make these conferences anymore?
Well, we might still for different reasons, but yeah, exactly. That level of public acceptance and familiarity is so high that it's sort of unremarkable.
Cool. Toby, is there any deployment, something that will happen on the real world that you are looking forward to?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So where I live in Los Angeles, in Sherman Oaks, we don't yet have Waymo. I've seen them starting to map in the area. I've seen them on the freeway, so I'm really excited about them coming over the hill from where they operate today. So very selfishly, I'm excited for that opportunity. For Beep, we have a couple really interesting rollouts coming. One in particular that's really, really cool is connected to the FIFA World Cup, specifically for games in Atlanta. That's going to be kicking off in conjunction with the Atlanta Beltline in June. And so for Beep, very selfishly excited about that. And that is with the Carson EJAS platform, which will be the first time that's been deployed in an autonomous way in the US. So really excited about that for us.
Yeah, we should all try that.
Yeah, please do.
It's really cool. So Randy, so you have the last word of the session.
Great.
What are you looking forward to?
Well, we're talking about cities. And I was going to say something in a rural application, but in the city, I think going along with Toby and Paul said, I think the integration between that first and last mile dilemma that we have to get more people utilizing transit to reduce congestion, improve safety, and then lower greenhouse gases. I think that is Mecca. If we can figure that out, how do we get you out of the homes to get to the appointments, get groceries, but not have to drive your single occupant vehicle? I think that's a great time.
I love that. So I will first say a big round of applause for all of you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. This is Megan. We were talking backstage about how delightful it is to have two 6-foot blondes hosting this closing fireside chat. That never happens. Megan, I think everybody just heard your title, Head of Insights, Product and User Experience Research at Waymo. I was assured that this is the coolest job to have at Waymo, if not anywhere. So if you wouldn't mind, start by telling us what that means. What is it that you do?
Yeah. We study how people interact with Waymo. So we study a customer experience, we study market experience, we study pedestrian experience, we try to basically understand where we're operating, what the context is that we're operating in, and then how to help improve the product to kind of meet the needs of all those different places. So we look at both the kind of interaction touch points in the car, so like the vehicle screens, the voice that you hear, the way that you interact with the app, but then we also work on a lot of stuff like in the operations in the depots, operations tooling, and we were just talking about the cleaning protocols within Waymo, and we work on the developer experience, so people that are helping develop the Waymo driver, how they see the world and what information and context they get in the decisions that they're making. So there's a lot of human touch points in this world, and that's what we study. And our role lives within product, so our role is really about helping bring human insights into the product development process and making sure that the Waymo driver and the Waymo service is very human-centric in what we end up bringing to the world.
It also sounds like your role has really expanded since you have gotten to Waymo, and I'm assuming that is in large part because you're awesome. But
Waymo's been growing. Yeah.
But I also wonder, what does it suggest about the importance of that research and just the fact that when you roll something out, you start discovering things you maybe wouldn't have anticipated?
Yeah. So the very first project that I worked on at Waymo was in 2019 when we took the Waymo. It was the first time that we took the specialist out of the front seat, so we call that rider only when we were kind of moving to a fully empty car. And in that first study, we were really interested in how did people feel, about taking this autonomous ride? And what we learned was that very quickly, people judge a Waymo on the first couple of turns or intersections or moments, and then they kind of let their guard down and say, this feels okay. But people were very quick to kind of judge the driving. And so it really made us realize how important these very subtle characteristics of our driver were. And that has been expansive because everything that we've done since is expanding all these more complex driving scenarios. And now that we're operating on freeways and all sorts of little nuances that when you're a rider, you're judging all the time kind of how that driver is driving. And you feel, very implicitly, your own sense of comfort and trust. And so a lot of what we're trying to study all the time is when does that comfort and trust really feel resonant? And is there a wiggle or is there a movement that, starts to erode that in any way? And then that's something that we can build metrics around and try to fix and address. So that's why it's been so expansive, is because as we go to all these new places and all these new traffic contexts, we learn new stuff every day. We just read so much feedback and we build improvements and we go to new places. And so right now we're studying international context. So driving in London, driving in Japan is not like driving in Atlanta or in San Francisco. And so we're trying to really build this generalizable driver, and there's just a lot to learn. So it's very cool. It's fun.
I'm reminded as you talk about this, it's sort of this is new technology in lots of different places that people are also new to. I'm reminded of kind of like the moment when EV developers discovered that they can't see, or when AV developers discovered that they can't see in snow. And which was like a moment, right? So much of this technology was being developed in California, and then they went to Michigan to start working with OEMs, and we're like, whoops, we didn't think about snow. So
we're thinking a lot about snow. We're thinking a lot about snow right now. Yeah, you might see Waymo cars.
I bet you are. This was like more than a decade ago, but it's sort of no technology survives contact with humans.
Well, and the dynamics of traffic and snow are different, right? Because there's all these like cultural rules that start to show up. Like you start following the imprints of the road users before you. So the lanes, when they become less visible, kind of become implied by like the tracks of the previous person. So it's no longer measurement based. It's not just like where we know that lane used to be based on our sensors. It's also then being able to like read the context of where other people have driven and where that kind of new lane has emerged to be. So that's the kind of stuff that's like, complicated. And it's like a lot of new learning every time we go and start driving in a new place.
I am definitely going to ask you, we're going to broaden out to cities any second now, but now that we're on this kind of question of unexpected things, what's the most unexpected thing in your time at Waymo that you've encountered and had to study?
It shouldn't have been unexpected, but it has been unexpected to me is how profound the experience has been specifically for women and young women, and the sense of like personal safety. So we do surveys with our riders all the time to understand the impact that Waymo is making in their lives. And one of the stats that comes up all the time is that women significantly more will say things along the lines of like, Waymo has changed my sense of personal safety getting around the city, right? And they'll say that it depends on the market between 54 and 61% of the time, right? And so this is something that's like, it's even more notable between the ages of 18 and 34. And so it does kind of provide this feeling that like there is a new modality, right? Like it is a different, even though it's similar in a lot of ways to other ways that we've gotten around the city, it is also novel, and it is providing a net new benefit. And to me, that was something that I guess I hadn't realized even on my own sense of vulnerability in some of these situations. And when you get comfortable riding with Waymo all the time, actually become very quickly adapt to that. So we see a lot of women, when we first launch in a new city, women are not often the first demographic to hand raise for brand new technology. It's not like, oh, let me try this. Right. But what's so interesting is that once women start riding Waymo, their engagement with Waymo is actually even higher, right, than engagement of men. So there's like once you have this feeling of trust in space, that's very profound, like more profound than I think I was expecting coming into the job, for sure.
Okay, so we are here to talk about AVs, and also specifically AVs in cities and in these places where they operate. And just as a baseline, when you think about what makes Waymo necessary, what are the benefits? What are the reasons that a city and the people of that city want Waymo in their town? Like, what are the definitions of success for you?
Yeah, we are a safety-driven company. So this sounds kind of boring, but it's actually, the stats are amazing. So safety is the reason that Waymo is a service that we are trying to bring to all these different cities, right? And I think it's very quick to be like, yeah, road safety is something that we all care about. But when you really look at the data story, it's very impressive. So like Waymo, in the cities that we've been operating the first 170 million miles, you see that we have 92% fewer injury-related or more serious crashes, right? We have 92% less injury-related pedestrian crashes. So it's not like an incremental difference of 5%, or it's 92% is a huge percentage. So I do think that there's a safety story there that is the reason that we feel so compelled to like keep pushing and try to bring this technology and this service to all these different places, because even though there's tons of stuff that we're working on and tons of stuff that we see there's a need for improvement in, and that's like a lot of what my team does, is it's like we need to work on the pickups and drop-offs. At the same time, it's like the safety story and the data is showing that it is making such a big difference just to like fundamental road safety in the places that we are, that we feel like we need to keep bringing this, right? And we need to keep working on it and keep trying to, yes, increasingly make the service more convenient and more, nuanced in the places that we are, but also it's like working from a fundamental goals perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a fully electric fleet. And as you, I think, heard in the introduction, I'm a longtime tech and business journalist, now turned to climate tech, so I have to ask you about this. But also I appreciate that it happens.
Yeah.
And also we know that reducing the number of cars on the road is itself a huge win in terms of sustainability. So I wonder how you think about those metrics and making that decision, which, as you pointed out, is not the cheapest way to build a fleet.
Yeah, there's two parts. So one part is just like personal car ownership. And so what we do see is that 36% of Waymo riders feel that Waymo has reduced their reliance on their personal car. And that is pretty profound, because that is the like shift away from everyone's going to own their own car, right? And moving towards a more shared and networked transportation system. And so to us, that's like one big goal, right? Is like, how do we start to make this, you know, transportation is a team sport. How do we kind of make this something that we are all participating in, instead of having everyone in their isolated personally owned cars? Then the other part of it is just like kind of more like the pure carbon story, which is at this point we're operating about 1 million miles a week, more than 500,000 miles a week. And that's like, or sorry, not miles, trips a week. And that's about like 4 million miles. And so if you do the like rough math on that, that's like 530 tons of carbon that we're not emitting into the atmosphere by making that whole fleet electric. And so that's been like our kind of sustainability piece. It's like, one, yes, we're reducing the reliance on personal cars. Two, we're just trying to emit less carbon, right? But then I think for us, it's also just like this consideration of like, how do we start to think about the future, right? So when we think about these other, you know, you'll start to see the Waymo Ojai cars popping up in cities and some of these newer vehicles, like how do we build that as a networked approach? So our intention is to continue to be an electric vehicle company and continue to, you know, move on both of those initiatives at the same time.
Right. Somewhat on that note, Senator Wiener earlier brought up, of course, we're in San Francisco, where we just had the large power outage and what some refer to as Waymageddon. And I'm sorry, I wasn't going to not say it. But I thought Senator Wiener but he brought an interesting lens to it, right? Yeah. Which is reliability of energy. Mm-hmm. Like, you have an electric fleet that is networked in an increasingly climate severe world.
Yeah.
Not just San Francisco.
Yeah.
How do you think about the resilience of an all electric networked fleet in cases like that?
I mean, first, the PG&E outage was an extraordinary infrastructure event. I mean, it was like 1/3 of the city. So this was not like an everyday power outage.
But girl, that El Nino that's coming, it's not going to be that unusual for long.
This is actually the important point, though, is that we are operating at a scale. Like when we're talking about 500,000 trips a week, we're operating at a scale where we have to start thinking at this level, right? Like, what do we do when, right? Like a third of the city's power goes out. And I think that's where like we learned a lot from that event. We do a lot in just like our response protocols and making that faster and cleaner. And like I said, even like on the tooling that the folks use that are doing the emergency response on our side, are there user experience changes that we can make so that that whole flow is faster from our side, that back to the emergency responders, et cetera. So there's a lot that can be done. I also think it's important to remember that it's like, you know, there's a negativity bias that we all have that make these moments like really strong, right? And so there's so much content on social media that goes viral because it's like, look what Waymo did, you know, it's like they stopped in a really weird place and people are just like, duh. And then, but what's interesting is that we also know that it's like what builds trust over time is consistency. And so what we see is like the first time that when we first start operating in a city, most people think of Waymo from the news that they've seen, right? So their whole perception of AVs is based on what's on Reddit, what's in media, right? And then as we start operating in their neighborhood and we'll be driving by, they have interactions themselves, like as pedestrians, as cyclists, as other road users, and people will be like, oh, that was really polite, that was fine, right? And so there'll be 99 interactions that they'll have with a Waymo car that feel very normative and like very in tune with how they want us to be driving. And so then that's the thing that really builds trust over time, is like just your own experience. And we've seen that the more people experience Waymo either as interacting with us in traffic or as riders in the cars, that's what builds the trust, right? Because then you just see all the time that like, okay, these are really rare events that are getting the kind of like viral push.
You just have to ignore the memes a little bit.
Well, we read them all. I mean, my job is to understand feedback. So don't you worry. I have
She's like, we've seen it all.
I have a feed of like everything. No, because it's important for us to make sure that we're not missing stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And that we're working on all these key problems so that when things do happen, we know what we missed, right? And then how do we address it and how we make it better? And then how does that meet the like prioritization of like when will we have it be better? Are we ready for the next power outage?
Yeah.
So that's the goal of all the feedback, is to get it back in to make changes.
This gets to this kind of paradigm shift, I guess, right? When we think about user research and initially when you talk about it, it's the rider.
Yeah.
And it's the individual and maybe the one pedestrian outside.
Yeah.
Or the cyclist. But of course, these cities are users.
Yeah.
And those interactions have to be designed for and planned for also. And so I just would love for you to talk about broadly how you approach the places.
Yeah. Well, and most people actually are not, their first interaction with Waymo is not as a rider, right? Because usually we're operating in the beginning to just like understand the city, understand the traffic, understand our software. How does it work in this context? Is it working? Are there things that we need to change? Like there's a lot of safety and development work that happens before we say, okay, everyone can ride. And that is a very intentional part of our research process, because for us it's really important to understand like how are pedestrians feeling about Waymo in this new city, right? And is it consistent with what we've seen in San Francisco or Los Angeles, or are there new unique things that have come up?
Mm-hmm.
And then as a company, we're always trying to build what we call a generalizable driver, right? A driver that we can put in all these different contexts and it will adapt to the needs and the traffic cultures of all these places that we are. But then you find fascinating little tidbits about every new city. So it's like we went to Atlanta, and in Atlanta, the city had made a systematic decision to lower speed limits, and they were doing it for pedestrian fatality rates because they were trying to like make their streets safer, which for us is like super mission aligned with what we're trying to do. So we're like, and so we drive those speed limits. We always drive the speed limit, right? And so, but it's interesting because the culture of Atlanta traffic has not, as on whole, adapted to the city's initiative yet. So like even though the speed limit is now 25 and was 35, you still see a lot of people driving 35.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had to think about like, okay, so when we're driving the speed limit in a culture that isn't, right? Mm-hmm. Do we then just like go to the right lane more? Do we do things to try to be realistic about how this then feels to other road users who might be like honking at us, like assuming we should be driving 35 because everyone else is? But we want to do what the city wants us to do because we are also trying to get the speed limit to feel and be safer. So it's a very interesting dynamic. So it's a subtle example, but I think there's a lot of examples like that of like each place having some unique little details that we have to learn and then bring into our software so that we can be adaptive.
I mean, I feel like that is simultaneously probably a really big barrier to scaling quickly, and a barrier that I appreciate hearing that you are considering, because it would be very easy, I would imagine, in the interest of growth, to cut and paste Waymo services into cities.
Yeah. Well, it's both. So one, we've found that our driver has been very generalizable. Mm-hmm. So like we were able to announce and launch 5 markets at the same time just a couple months ago. So it's like, it's working, right? So it's not like the driver had so much difference. So the generalizability, broadly speaking, is working. And also, the reason that we don't turn it on day one is because there's like still a lot of learning and a lot of development, a lot of like safety related work that we have to do to make sure that we've understood this context fairly enough that we can, deploy and launch the software. So.
What is the response generally? I mean, I think, again, we've all seen the memes, and then there are negativity biases, always.
Yeah.
And then we're at this sort of weird societal point about automation and AI acceptance.
Yeah.
What are you finding, and what is hard to overcome, or is it easier than we would think?
Yeah, we've definitely seen that as we spend time in any city, acceptance grows. So I do think that there is like, as you experience Waymo yourself, you make that decision for yourself, but the consistency of our performance is what ultimately wins trust, right? And we've seen polling as recent as February, March, so after that PG&E outage in San Francisco with San Francisco voters, where nearly 3 out of 4, so 73% of San Francisco voters felt that they were safe with Waymo driving in the streets, and actually 8%, so about 2/3, felt that Waymo actually made the streets feel safer. So it had like a positive contribution to road safety. And that's a huge percentage. Like there's not a lot of things that you can say like, oh, the San Francisco voters, at 2/3, right, believe in this one thing. So I think that that's the kind of polling that does give us confidence that like, yes, there's improvements we could make from the PG&E outage. And also, right, on whole, San Franciscans have been, grateful for and think that the safety contribution that we're making is notable. So.
I'm torn on asking this question because as you talk about driving the speed limit and I think about my town, I don't want any Waymos to get killed. But earlier, the representative from Uber said it was a conversation about equity and expansion and what makes you choose a city for expansion. You were called out a tiny bit. She said that Waymo is permitted for expansion into Oakland, where I live and have been since 1999, and isn't there yet.
Yeah.
And we do sometimes feel a little slighted by these cool new things.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what goes into the decision to come to a city or not, / when are you coming to Oakland?
Yeah. I mean, Oakland's definitely in the plan. I think it's just like we are trying to, in every city, incrementally grow. So we, as much as we would love to say like, oh, we're going to go to Dallas and we're going to go to the entire metro on day one, like what you'll usually see is that we'll start right in a very specific service area and then we'll grow from that service area out, right? So there's a lot of considerations that go into like which directions and how far we grow and in what way. One of those is though like equity, and we look at like what are the gen pop demographics of this area and like trying to make sure that we're bringing in all these different neighborhoods and groups so that we're not just like going to in one way. So like we were very intentional that like when we started going into the peninsula that we weren't just like going to one part of Silicon Valley, that we were going down through San Jose, that we're picking up like a much larger population of like who lives in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. That being said, there's also like geographic pieces of that consideration. So there's these like understandability of that service area. Oakland is like the next geography. So you'll probably see that when we do something like in Oakland, it'll be like one large piece, right? So it's like going over a bridge to a new place is not something you do like a little tiny bit of. You usually kind of do like a whole neighborhood, 2 or 3 neighborhoods at a time.
Right.
So which is true of other cities too. Like you'll see that like we'll start here, we'll increase, and then sometimes we'll be like, oh, this whole new southern part that we weren't at before we'll now include. Yeah. So.
But I mean, not to put you on the spot, you did go to the peninsula before the East Bay, and the East Bay is pretty close.
Yeah, bridges are hard. Yeah, so
bridges are hard.
Actually, yeah, I mean, the bridges are hard.
I mean, that is why I usually stay on my side. Yeah. The bridges.
No. I mean, there's lots. I don't mean to say that that's the reason. There's many considerations and reasons, and it was absolutely part of the discussion. And I do think that there's a desire, especially since we're like a company from San Francisco, that's like we would love to cover as much of the Bay Area as quickly as possible. But I do think that there's also just like a lot of limitations and reasons why to go one versus the other. And I do think that bridges are one. Right?
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Also, I mean, to be fair, for those of you who live in Oakland, our roads are basically a ball of hair. It's just like Berkeley has a grid. Okay, this is a separate conversation. Let's get back to individual ridership. So, so you lay all the groundwork in a city, people get kind of accustomed to seeing Waymos, and then there comes the point where you're ready to accept riders into the cars. Mm-hmm. What gets them there? Like what causes, because it's a bit of a behavior, it's not a complete behavior change maybe from a taxi, obviously, or Ubers, but like what gets them to download the app and say, hey, I want to do this thing?
We see it kind of like a fairly organically growing. So there's usually a lot of people that are waiting for us to come. So we're in a moment right now where there's a lot of people that are reading about AV in other places, and so the moment that we like started in Miami, we're starting to get like my team gets emails like, when are you opening the trusted tester program in Miami? And it's like we just announced it yesterday. So there is a lot of like organic interest. Like I think people are just like excited about it. They're excited when we announce any new city, they want to be there. And then what we usually see is that there's like kind of an effect of like that first rider takes their friend, takes their family, takes their, right? So there's a lot of like, you know, stories that we hear in our interviews where it's like, yeah, I brought my mom, you know, and she wasn't sure. And then she was like taking it on her own. And so there's a little bit of like a, you know, kind of like passed down or like generational kind of evolution of like people coming into the product that way. And then I do think that what you'll see is that once we kind of are fully ready in a market, then we do see that there's like a much larger influx, right? Then that's once people kind of understand that they can ride, right? So once they kind of like either see marketing or they like start to like see enough of the cars around, they're like, oh, I should try that. That's when we really see like the quote larger market coming in. So it's a little bit of like an evolution from who those first riders are to their kind of like network, family, friends, and then there's like an awareness moment when people are like fully understanding that this is something that they can hail, that they'll like start, you'll actually see like the Gen Pop market start to come and ride. But that's not usually the first assumption is not like, oh, I could ride that. You know, a lot of times people will watch Waymo with curiosity, like, oh, what is that? What, you know, and then they'll start to put together like, oh, that's that autonomous vehicle, and oh, I can hail it. And then that's when we start to see like, you know, the more like representative market
right.
become riders.
Just out of curiosity, how long does that typically take, and is that time getting shorter?
Yeah, it's changing. Yeah. So like, because when we've been very methodical, and some people say slow for a tech company, even though it feels also very fast. But we were in Chandler, Arizona, right? And it was like a year, 2 years. Like even when we came to San Francisco, you know, the first deployment was like 11 riders, then 50, then 100. So it is incremental. And so I do think that like we are trying to make that faster. We're trying to get to the point where we can go to a market and we can just make it publicly available quickly, right? It's just, we're not going to do that at the cost of our safety framework or our development timelines. So we're just trying to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we get faster.
Okay, and then the other story that we heard on the panel, in fact, not very long ago, was Martin saying that he...
I heard, yeah.
Yep, that he brought up his $22 Waymo option, and he took his $2 Enjuta instead, or $2.85. I know that matching the price of the Enjuta is not the goal, but how do you integrate with transit? And do you think of Waymo as a replacement for transit or a complement?
The goal is to integrate with transit for sure. I don't think our goal is not to compete with the price of high capacity transit, right? Our goal is to try to integrate to and complement high capacity transit. And we do see that Waymo riders do that now. So not to keep sharing those different stats, but one very interesting stat about this is 69% of Waymo riders in the last 2 months have incorporated transit into that journey. So they're already using Waymo in this multimodal way. We see a lot of Waymo riders are also cyclists. They're also, pedestrians. So there's a lot of integration, especially in San Francisco, where it's a very multimodal city and culture in general. Waymo riders are consistent with that. I think, and you've seen maybe, like we've done various pilots, we've done research, we've done like a lot of pieces of trying to find this transit integration puzzle. So like in Chandler right now, you can ride via, you can get a subsidy when Chandler transit is not online, right? So there's basically like a full complement where it's like when it's offline, you can take a Waymo via via, get a subsidy. And so there's things like this, but these are all like relatively small pilots. I think like what I was saying earlier about the generalizable driver and what we're trying to build is something that we can take us, to different cities and it will operate in different contexts. The ideal is something similar with transit, right? So the goal is like, can we figure out a way to integrate with transit so that we can have that same solution working in all these different city contexts? And that's kind of tough, right? Because it's like a much harder problem that all of you are aware of that, we can't solve ourselves completely, but we're working on, right? It's like, are there ways to figure out like, in any different transit system with their own payment structures and their own kind of like details, how does Waymo fit with that, right? And can we do it in a way that in every city that you go to with the Waymo app, that you can do this transit integration step or, have some monetary compensation for the fact that part of your leg was transit or whatever. So there's a lot of ideas around it. I don't have any like product launches, but it is something we've been studying for years and we're very keen to come up with generalizable solutions for. So if you have any ideas, like this is an active conversation within the company.
Okay, challenge issues.
Yeah.
So something that is generalizable, general enough to take to a city or a state and say, this is how we would like to operate, and then it shouldn't be that hard to maybe bolt on your individual transit needs or pricing.
I just think it will make it makes it possible for us to do transit integration more quickly in many places at the same time.
Yeah.
In the pilots where you have to do very custom solutions based on each different agency's needs, it's just harder. And then it takes a lot more resources. It takes a lot more time. Then you have to start prioritizing like which ones to do where. And like I just think, in the spirit of like, can you start to broadly meet the goal of driving people towards transit? That's what we want to get to.
And that is just to reiterate, that is
the goal. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially, we've been talking very publicly about our work in London and in Tokyo, and those are transit-heavy cities. Like a big part of how people get around London is the tube, right? And we're not trying to compete with that. We're just trying to make sure that like we can become part of their overall mobility picture with the tube. And so that's like, that's a perfect example of like, yes, it's absolutely part of the conversation, especially with those two cities. So and then here, and then this is a pretty transit-focused city as well.
Right, but with a real big last mile problem.
Yeah, well, right. but that's the part we can play.
Exactly,
yeah,
that's where you fit in. Yeah,
and that's the part that we see people doing now. Mm-hmm. So we do see people already using us for that kind of multimodal stop, where they'll take the Caltrain, to the station, and then they'll take Waymo to the next bit or whatever.
Right. Are there policy levers that can be in play there? Like what is your level of public-private partnership or ideal level of public-private partnership?
I don't work on the policy team, so I don't. I really don't. I don't know the answer to that.
I personally, no, thank you.
No, I just know. I mean, from a customer perspective, I think because that's my view always in the company is like, what's the customer and the market need? And the customer and the market need is like, there are these like public policy oriented, either systems or incentives or kind of ways of bringing people to transit that they would love for Waymo to be part of. Like the expectation is not that we're going to make some new redundant way or like, they don't want another card or another, like I know San Francisco spent a lot of time trying to get to like a shared access point and a shared payment system. So like the customer expectation is to try to make that as seamless as possible.
Right.
And that's also the generalizability is they want to also be able to go to a new city and still use Waymo in the same way and use transit in the same way as well.
Amazing. We have gotten the zero, and I really, as a radio professional, care about time. So Megan Neese, head of Insights Project, Insights Product and User Experience Research. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Okay, everybody's still in the room, and I don't know about you, but it went quite fast, and we are now approaching the end of our program. But last but not least, we have a tradition to have on stage someone who always managed to grasp particular aspect of the conference. And again, this year, thank you very much for that. I'm pleased to welcome on stage Michael Goldman from the University of San Francisco, Associate Dean. Michael, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. All right, how are we feeling? Great. Feeling good? Yeah? All right, can we get the lights up a little bit in the room so everyone can see themselves? Have you seen each other for the last few hours? Look left, look right. All right, so as mentioned, I'm Michael Goldman. I'm one of the associate deans at the college, at the university. And so, again, welcome and thank you for spending the last few hours digging deep into some of these questions. Over the next 7 to 10 minutes, what we hope we'll be able to do is pull some of these threads together. And so, some of you may have read some early OpenAI documents. And one of the great lines that you may recall from the top of those documents is that everyone can see the future first in San Francisco. Remember that line? You can see the future first in San Francisco. And I think we've had a lot of that today. But when you think about seeing the future, it's about action. And so what I'd encourage us to do now is think a little bit in 2s and 3s, where you're sitting for the next few minutes, around 3 questions. Number 1, based on what you heard today, based on some of the debates and the questions and the thinking, what are the kind of things that you would start doing that you're not doing right now? Wherever you are within this ecosystem, what would you start doing? Second question is, what would you stop doing? You may not want to share that publicly, but think about that, right? What would you start doing? What would you stop doing? And as you can guess, the third question is, what would you intensify? What are you currently doing that you would do a hell of a lot more of? So, on the first question, what would you start doing? Great ideas that came out of today, new insights, things that you hadn't thought about yet. What are some of the things from today that you might start doing? I think we've got a microphone or two around in the room. Thank you. Anybody want to share something for slightly public consumption? What would you want to start doing? I see a hand in the front here. Yes, please.
I love how you turned this into an MBA classroom. I'm Shobana Shankar, and I'm a business leader in the mobility space. And I think that one of the questions I actually wanted to pose to the regulatory panel was the extent to which different regulatory agencies are collaborating with the insurance industry. That happens to me to be my background. So I care about the feedback loop in terms of data sharing and thinking and brainstorming with, Miguel talked about how leading indicators and lagging indicators in the insurance industry sits on a ton of data assets, and I think there ought to be more of an in-depth conversation around how AV companies can collaborate with the insurance industry, how the insurance industry can play an active role in improving public safety and actually enabling, reducing barriers to entry for AV deployments. And that is something that conversation that I've been part of. So it's not necessarily a brand new start, but I think we need to have more of these conversations.
Yeah, that collaboration, right? And how do we start that collaboration today over drinks upstairs in a few minutes' time and tomorrow morning or maybe Monday morning? I don't know. Depends how urgent it is. Any other starting ideas? Looking left, looking right? Anybody hear anything interesting? Yeah, did you hear something good? Okay. What did you hear?
I was volunteered by my partner. Yes, I was sharing with her that usually our students in the classroom know very well how to manage the demand and optimize the routes, and they go immediately to work at Waymo, Zoox, Uber. And what we were seeing is while we have them at the university, we can do these scenario games in which you have, if all the autonomous cars are shared, what is the social optimum?
Yeah.
And then testing all these scenarios from social optimum to the business optimum and find the middle point, because all of us would benefit by not having a grid-locked city, right? Then that type is what I was sharing with you.
Oh, that's a great point, right? How do we do things that are in the interest of what we talk about in Catholic Jesuit education, the common home, the common good, right? How do we think about the individual freedom and rights versus what works for everyone? Yeah, and that's a key thing I know in the classroom, right, that we're constantly thinking about. Right, so those are some of the ideas of what we might start out of today. What are the things that you heard that would put a stop to some of the things that you, or maybe your colleagues, are currently doing? Anybody want to, in the middle.
So this is something I've been actively talking over with my wife for a couple of years, and I think we're getting very close to it, which is it's time for us to go carless.
To go carless. And so as a family, right, at the individual level, what's our individual responsibility? That's how change happens. Yeah, change the world from here. That's how it happens, right? It's that individual action. Thank you. Any other stopping that we're seeing from today? Anything else you heard that you might have had an assumption about that you want to change on the right-hand side here? Henriette, thank you.
Okay, this is both intensify but also stop.
Cool.
I think often I equate robotaxis and AVs, so I need to stop putting robotaxis in a narrow AV box, and start expanding AVs to include all of the segments. And then when I'm talking, specify which AV fleet vehicle class I am referring to.
Yeah, wonderful. Good point. Yeah, the depth that we got into today was really cool. All right, last point. As we heard, intensification. You're going to take me there.
Intensification?
Yeah, what are you going to intensify? Or stop and then intensify?
Okay, two sides, same coin.
Yeah.
I want to stop demonizing private vehicle ownership and focus on providing better transportation for all Americans.
Yeah.
This is something that we do. There's even academic research on this. We tend, as transportation nerds, to live in more dense environments, to live in walkable communities, and to be inherently multimodal, which is wonderful. I love that. However, there are equity concerns, and that's not what we have in America. Like, 8% of America is deemed highly walkable if you use walk stores. Not perfect, but it's good enough. The rest of the 92% cannot go car-free or cannot easily go car-free right now. So I want to focus, including with automated vehicles, do more on providing transportation that will have a bigger impact overall for transportation, more for, especially in America, for people who live in single-family homes in at least somewhat car-dependent communities.
Yeah.
Because that will, if we can be successful there, if we can reduce emissions, go electric there, even just as an example, we can have a massive improvement. So the biggest thing I want to do is not, if we live in places that is car-free, that is absolutely wonderful. I want to focus more on car light, and I want to provide more opportunities and not tell people who drive cars that they're bad people who don't care about the environment.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah, how do we think about all of the different communities and the variance, right? The diversity and the variance that we have. Okay, some interesting points out of today for you? Yes? Yeah? So I want to share a date with you. July 4th, 1876. 4th of July, 1876. Any ideas what might have been special about that date? 4th of July, 1876. 100 years of the US. Right, our centennial. Okay. And a newspaper, remember those things? Newspaper in San Francisco described it as the grandest day San Francisco had ever seen. The grandest day San Francisco had ever seen. Why do you think they might have described it like that? Besides being the centennial, yes?
It was founded shortly before.
The city of San Francisco, yeah, not too much before. Do you remember when?
The point is, there wasn't many days before.
Right. So the grandest day of a very short group, yeah? Streetcar, close, close. We're kind of getting into that area, yes, before that. So it's 21 years after USF started, so that was cool, but that wasn't the reason. So, the reason comes back to USF though, because it was USF's Father Joseph Neri, one of the Jesuits that was teaching at the University of San Francisco, that lit the streets of San Francisco with electricity for the first time ever, generated by the first storage battery in California that he built with his students on campus in 1876. Combined with a magneto-electric machine that was donated, good idea, to the university, so that's awesome. All of this happened, as you may know, 3 years before Thomas Edison introduced his incandescent light bulbs to the rest of the US. Here, at the University of San Francisco, in San Francisco. That's what I think the last 10 years has been, right? For Billy Riggs and the AV focus. Right? This amazing community that he's built, this amazing looking forward sense, and the conversations that we've seen again today. So, the team at the back has a short video that they want to share with you, a bit of a memory lane, look back over some of the highlights from the last 10 years, and then we will wrap up.
For the past
last 10 years, the Autonomous Vehicles and the City Initiative has brought together ideas, people, and innovation to shape the future of mobility.
Okay, welcome.
Both the fun infrastructure terms.
Something like this involved, so that's a lot.
From early conversations to global discussions, this journey has connected researchers, policymakers, and industry leaders across continents. Through moments of collaboration, learning, and shared vision, we have explored how technology can better serve our cities and communities.
Not allowed in this forum.
Because I hear this a lot.
The amazing, completely kind of crazy goals.
Share, park car share, the demands on this asset have just...
At the heart of this initiative is a commitment to progress, guided by leadership, curiosity, and impact.
Related to sustainability and technology, and the combination of sustainability and technology, which
I think you're in for a lot of great education and a lot of great information today.
And that could be something up here, if you can identify a key theme, maybe pricing.
Today, we celebrate not just the milestones, but the people who made it possible. Thank you for being part of this journey. And here's to the next 10 years of innovation, collaboration, and transformation.
So let's invite the architect, Billy Riggs, up to the stage.
There's a lot of faces on there. It was a lot of good faces. 10 years. You've been here 10 years. Alan Sarver's been here 10 years.
Billy, congratulations.
You had some
Well done.
You had some good features in there, my friend.
Very cool. Billy Riggs.
Thank you. I think
there's a...
As well, I'm John as well, because together with Caden Rune, also a student from USF and also working hard at Urban Innovate, helping me with all my things. So we are very appreciative of everything you did, Billy. I have a little surprise in my bag for you that I will show in a moment. But mainly, I don't know if you guys realize what Billy's putting together, because he's making so much effort in this initiative, and it's an honor that I could join it. I've been very honored. I've been here on stage for like the past 3 years, and before that, you saw I was already online.
He was one of our COVID
and
guests.
when I was compiling this video, it was incredible to see the community that you have managed to build together, and these people become really like kind of friends, colleagues that we can rely on this within this initiative. So really congratulations, and for a little appreciation, I want to hand over to you a little trophy with appreciation for your leadership for 10 years of leadership.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Kaden has some flowers for you.
Oh, thank you, Kaden.
Yeah.
Got it. Oh, yeah, thank you. Well,
you have to keep it now.
I'll try not to kill them with my...
you prefer? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
You want to say a final word?
No, thank you, everyone. As you know, it takes a village. I will say, most people don't know Caden. No, stay up here. Caden was my research assistant first. Caden's graduating. He's been actually working as for Henriette's company. We fortunately were able to recruit Henriette as part-time to come work for us, and she was able to immigrate a couple years ago. So, here's to actually having someone with a lot of experience come over and give some of her time to the university, both to the engineering program, but to the autonomous vehicles and the city initiative. So thanks. Here's to kind of a great colleague in Henriette and a great student in Caden. So let's give them a hand of applause. But also, I've had great leadership at the University of San Francisco. It's not every university that will let I refer to myself many times as a free electron, and I think both Dean Aram Johnson, Dean Davis, Dean, all my deans at the university, my associate dean, give me a long leash. They let me do pretty much whatever I want, and it's a blessing and a curse, but I'm able, as a result, to do events like this, and I'm able to be of service not only to the university, but to this community. And I think as a result, I think we are able to serve this industry, but also to serve students like Caden, students at not only at our university, but hopefully, Scott, Marta, UC Berkeley students, UCLA students. I see Marcel, I saw you in the audience from San Jose State. I work a lot with MTI students, and I think I heard Tokes earlier acknowledging them and acknowledging the Drive AI team earlier. So, I view this as a big STEM community. Molly Wood and I were acknowledging that earlier and talking about our young people and the importance of really tackling AI and automation for our young people and even our K through 8 students and bringing them up no matter what educational institution they go through, whether or not it's a great institution like University of San Francisco or one of our strong state universities here in California. I believe the ties that bind us are stronger than the ties that separate us. So with that said, we would invite you all, I think I'm not remiss in saying that we'd invite this whole community up to the rooftop to celebrate this 10th anniversary. Those of you online, we know that this is a global audience, it's a global community. I'll be in Zurich celebrating with the Ultimo team and the PAVE EU team. I actually am in a lot, and Henriette is engaged a lot with the Partners for Automated Vehicles and an education group both in Europe and in the US, and we'll be with them in a couple weeks. But we thank you for joining us internationally, both in Asia and Europe. And for those of you in the US that couldn't join us and are here online, we thank you for joining us. For those of you here in the audience, really appreciate your participation. And for your those of you that have been here all 10 years and those of you who helped start this, could not be more grateful. So, well, that said, let's celebrate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thank you.